450. The matter of the kanji shop and medicine shop had been resolved. Ma Duyi and Seng Yi originally thought that they would continue on their journey to the border of the Shihao country as usual. There were 2 men from the border army whose last wishes were related to the otherworldly items. They could no longer return to their roots, but their wishes fell on their hometown. However, Chen Pinggan stayed for another day. It wasn't until dusk that he stopped at the city gate and watched a dark and thin youth leave the county city from afar. He then went to see the closed dog meat shop in the alley. On both sides of the wall outside the door, there were 2 door gods of Dali, Yuan Cow, and Yuan Cow. Only then did Chen Pinggan return to the inn. Previously at the city gate, Chen Pinggan saw the cultivator who followed Dali's army, Guan Iran. The latter deliberately left the retainers and soldiers beside him and stood alone at the city gate with Chen Pinggan. He asked softly, "Are you going to cast a long line to catch a big fish and temporarily release the tiger back to the mountain so that you can find the place where this little demon obtained the Tao and 1 or 2 immortal items? Or are you going to let this little demon go far away and treat it as a good karma?" The mountain and lake monsters could transform into human form, so they must have great luck. Either they accidentally entered an abandoned immortal's cave or swallowed a Ganoderma medicine that condensed the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. No matter which it was, the former would follow the vine to find the melon, while the latter would directly refine the monster. Either way, it would be an unexpected windfall. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "It's the latter." Guan Iran said regretfully, "It's a pity. If you didn't show up, I have 2 colleagues who complain every day that they don't have enough to eat would have already set their eyes on this little demon nesting in the dog meat shop. But since you intervened, I persuaded them to give up. It's just an extra. In fact, I still have military affairs to do. Of course, if you choose the former, we can do it together." Chen Pinggan asked, "If I interfere, won't I be reducing the benefits of your colleagues? Won't it make things difficult for you?" Guan Iran smiled and said, "Although my 2 friends and I are cultivators, we are actually more members of the Dali army. So with your words and your kind intentions, it's enough. It's rare to meet people from the same hometown when you're away from home. You can be less courteous, but it's best if you're courteous. If you're courteous, that's fine. If you're not courteous, that's fine too. At worst, we'll just pretend not to know each other when we meet in the future. Everything will be done according to our Dali laws and military rules." Chen Pinggan deeply agreed, "That's right." Guan Iran laughed heartily. "I'm very happy to be able to meet such a promising family member like you in a place thousands of miles away from home." Chen Pinggan cupped his fists and said, "It's inconvenient for me to reveal my identity now. If there's a chance in the future, I'll definitely look for Brother Guan for a drink." Guan Iran, Dali's secretary, raised his arm, clenched his fist, and tapped the armor on his chest. "Then I'll remember it. Let me say this first. On the battlefield, brothers were saved by me. It doesn't matter if you owe me your life. But if you owe me, Guan Iran, wine, even the Heavenly Emperor won't allow it." This was a chance meeting between fellow countrymen in a foreign land. Every time they parted, they enjoyed themselves to the fullest. When the young man in the blue cotton robe was far away from the city gate, 2 cultivators wearing the special light armor of Dallas Arsenal slowly came over. One was a strong young man, and the other was a delicate woman. The woman looked at Guan Iran, who seemed to want to continue, and asked curiously, "Iran, the beginning of spring this year isn't a good sign. You lost so much immortal money for nothing, yet you're still so happy." Guan Iran chuckled and said, "I'm happy. Even 1,000 gold can't buy my happiness." The strong man said, "A young cultivator who can easily give away a small amount of money didn't ask for anything from that little demon. Instead, he deliberately sent her all the way to the city gate. Plus, he previously opened a porridge shop and medicine shop in the city. According to the spy report, it's not just one city, but everywhere. If it's someone else, I don't believe that there's such a bodhisattva on the mountain. But if it's this person, looking at his words and deeds, it all makes sense. I think Iran did the right thing. He's a fellow countryman. If he can be a friend worth drinking with, it's not a loss." A young woman with a graceful figure and a huge sword at her side complained, "You men are all like this. Whenever you meet someone you like, You like to puff yourself up at your own cost. Is there a need for you to be like this? Guaniran said seriously, Miss Qi, I'm not happy to hear you talk about us men like this. I'm much richer than you Shanfang. Why do I need to slap my face until it's swollen? Who was the one who said that a dandy from a rich family like me stinks of money when I fart? A dog's mouth can't spit out ivory. The woman with a slender figure like a willow in spring punched Guaniran's shoulder, causing him to stagger back a few steps. The woman turned around and walked back to the city gate. Guaniran grimaced and rubbed his shoulder. It really hurt. He smiled bitterly. The brawny man named Yu Shanfang gloated. The woman was a military cultivator from the Wind Snow Temple. Compared to the cultivators of true Martial Mountain who mostly served as middle and high-level military officers in the Dali Iron Cavalry, the woman surnamed Qi didn't have such an opportunity. She just chose a different path. However, the Dali border army didn't find this strange. Most of the military cultivators of the Wind Snow Temple were like this. After leaving the mountain, they liked to be lone rangers. Occasionally, there were women like this, but they also served as the personal retainers of some important generals. Yu Shanfang put his arm around Guaniran's shoulder and said in a low voice, Iran, for so many years, just like me, I've known you for 7 or 8 years, but I still only thought that you were a general's son from the capital, the kind of family that can't achieve high or low positions. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been thrown to such a shabby place by your family and stayed there for nearly 3 years. You've always been the lowest level cultivator in our border army. You have to know that your capital accent is so annoying. On the contrary, Chi, you've only known each other for less than 2 years. This time, we just went south together, but she was the only one who saw through your family's identity. She insisted that you were a rich family's son. Why? We old brothers who have pooped together in the snow don't quite believe it. Could it be that you two have already? After Yu Shanfang broke free from Guaniran, he pressed his thumbs against his chest and winked at the latter. Guaniran said helplessly, who doesn't know that this Chi has admired her junior martial granduncle of the Wind Snow Temple, Sword Immortal Wei Jin for a long time. Guaniran sighed, and I already have a fiancé. To tell you the truth, she's really a legitimate daughter of the capital's aristocratic family. It's just that I've never seen her before. It's funny to think about it. In the future, when I get married and lift the red veil, I'll know what my wife looks like. Yu Shanfang asked curiously, which family's unlucky daughter ended up with such a crude border army man like you? You don't have to bury your own brother like this. Guaniran held the hilt of the Dali border army's standard saber with his palm and walked side by side with Yu Shanfang on the streets of a foreign country. Looking around, on both sides of the streets, there were almost 2 painted door gods, Dali, Yuan, and Cao, posted on almost all the streets. There were only a few surnames in the pillar state. Of course, the surnames Yuan and Cao were Dali, worthy of being the big surnames among the big surnames. However, there were actually 2 other surnames in the pillar state that could wrestle with the surnames Yuan and Cao. However, one of them was on the mountain and almost ignored worldly affairs. His surname was Yu. The other was only in the imperial court and never set foot in the border army. His ancestral home was in Yi province and later moved to the capital. It had been 200 years. Every year, the descendants of this family returned home to worship their ancestors. Even the Ministry of Rites of Dali paid attention to it. Even the imperial tutor of Dali once joked with His Majesty that 100 years ago, during the period when eunuchs interfered in politics, foreign relatives abused power, the towns rebelled, and cultivators took turns to go to war, causing the whole of Dali to be in the most chaotic and tragic years. If it weren't for this family turning the tide and working diligently as the tinkerers of the Dali dynasty, Dali would have long collapsed to the point that it couldn't be any more broken. Yu Shanfang crossed his fingers and stretched forward, stretching his muscles and bones. The joints of his body crackled. Under the fate of many people, this half-wild cultivator who was promoted step by step from a border army scout to a secretary casually said, "In fact, sometimes when us old brothers drink and chat, we also feel that you're not the same as us. But in the end, we can't say what's different about you. There's no way. We can't compare to those sons of generals who were stuffed into the army. We're all guys who wash our eyes in the wind and sand of the border every day. Our eyesight isn't good, far from those sons of officials. Guan Yiran smiled and said, I recognize 3 kinds of friends. On the battlefield, those who dare to say they'll die. In the officialdom, those who truly have the strength of character are scholars. Finally, those on the mountain are good people. Guan Yiran was a bit sad. It's a pity that the first and third kinds don't seem to live for long. There's no need to say much about the battlefield. After so many years of life and death, and the death of our best brothers, we're no longer like women, crying our hearts out. The third kind, I used to know a young man called Yu Yin. I especially admire a peer of the same age. How good is he? He's so good that you feel, no matter how bad the world is, it's enough to have him in front of you, talking and doing things. You only need to look at his back that's gradually getting farther and farther away, and you'll feel happy. But such a good cultivator died in such an unworthy way. The clan that had high hopes for him, and our imperial court, for the sake of the big picture, chose to turn a big matter into a small matter and nothing at all. I think this isn't right, but will those big shots listen to the words of a small person like me, Guan Yiran? They won't. Even if my surname is Guan. Yu Shanfang laughed and said, so what if your surname is Guan? It wasn't the Guan family of Yunzai County, which was one of the pillars of the country. Your household register in the military clearly states that you came from the capital. Don't you know what kind of conduct our general has? I've already found out everything about you. You're just a third-rate general family in the capital. Let's not talk about the Yinkai Alley, where the Shangzhou states are neighbors, where the Shangzhou states quarrel with the Shangzhou states, and where the Shangzhou states quarrel with each other across the wall. Your family doesn't even have the qualifications to build a small courtyard there. Why? Are you related to the Guan family in Yunzai County? It's because our old comrade and sworn enemy, General Liu, inexplicably found out that a young scout under his command was actually a second-rate general's son in the capital who didn't show off his abilities. His ancestor was a second-rank general and even received a posthumous title that made people salivate. Our general felt that he was being suppressed by General Liu. Now, he's dreaming every day that there's a first-rate general's son hidden among the children he brought out. What a joke. Guan Yiran hesitated for a moment. If I die one day, our general might cry and laugh and scold me. Yu Shanfang said in shock, what? Are you really a descendant of the Guan family in Yi Province? Guan Yiran nodded and said, Yi Province's Yunzai County's Guan family. I'm the direct great-great-grandson. There's no other way. Although my family's ancestor isn't a cultivator, his muscles and bones are very strong. At 100 years old, he can still drink a gin of wine and eat 2 gin of meat in a meal. Back then, when the imperial tutor saw him, he was surprised. Yu Shanfang rolled his eyes and said, I don't believe you. If you can see the imperial tutor, I can see His Majesty the Emperor. Guan Yiran snorted, I said it. If you don't believe me, then believe it or not. Anyway, it's none of my business. Yu Shanfang said suspiciously, really? Guan Yiran smiled and nodded, I'm not lying to you. Remember when I went back to the capital on leave 2 years ago? Chi said that she once followed the preacher to the capital in the first month. It might have been in that Yuhua Lane or Chong'er Street. At that time, I was visiting people, so Chi inadvertently glanced at me. However, those 2 places had strict rules, so Chi didn't dare to follow me. Of course, at that time, Chi and I didn't know each other, so there was no need to investigate my identity. Yu Shanfang quietly stretched out his hand, sneakily wanting to touch Guan Yiran's head. Guan Yiran tilted his head and laughed angrily, what? Thinking about women so much that you've gone crazy. Do you think I'm Chi? Yu Shanfang rubbed his hands and said, I haven't touched a big shot in my life, so I want to get a feel for it. TSK, Pillar State Guan. Tonight, Lousy will get you drunk, and then I'll touch you as much as I want. Call the old brothers, one by one. Guan Yiran laughed, if you can do such a wicked thing, I'll go back and marry the girl you said was a fairy. When the time comes, I'll call you brother-in-law every day. Yu Shanfang kicked Guan Yiran's butt. Guan Yiran took the kick and didn't dodge. The 2 continued to walk side by side. Yu Shanfang suddenly sighed, about this matter, when the brothers leave, you should tell them, even if you secretly tell them. Guanyiran was silent for a moment, then shook his head. I can't say it. Yu Shanfang nodded sadly. That's true. Guanyiran suddenly laughed. When I die on the battlefield one day, the truth will come out. At that time, whether it's our general or you, at least you can pat your chest and talk to the other cavalry. Yu Shanfang shook his head. Don't die. Guanyiran also shook his head, slowly saying, just because I'm a descendant of Yi Province's Guan family, born noble, I can't die? Dali doesn't have such a reason. Yu Shanfang laughed. You're wrong. I just feel that I'm looking at you the same way you looked at that peer called Yu Yin back then. In the future, you'll become a high official in our Dali imperial court. Even if you go to the capital at that time, no longer wearing armor and wearing official clothes every day, and I'll still stay in the border army, the two of us won't have anything to do with each other in this life, but I'll still feel at ease, more at ease. Guanyiran nodded. Yu Shanfang asked curiously, I'm puzzled. You young and old general descendants, why do you all seem to like to conceal your identity and become an inconspicuous border army scout? Guanyiran laughed and said, in Ichi Alley and Chaoer Street, every descendant of a general family who still has a bit of face hopes that they can be a genuine frontier army scout in this lifetime, not relying on their ancestors' meritorious service, but relying on their own ability to cut off the enemy's head one by one and hang it next to the saddle. In the future, no matter what the reason is, when you return to Yingkai Alley and Chaoer Street, even if it's the worst young man in Chaoer Street, after becoming a border scout and then meeting those bastards of Yingkai Alley on the road, once there's a conflict, as long as it's not too unreasonable, you can just beat the other side up. After that, you don't have to be afraid of implicating your ancestors and family. Absolutely nothing will happen. From my grandfather to my generation, it's always been like this. Yu Shanfang clicked his tongue in wonder. This is also possible. Guanyiran stomped his feet and smiled. That's why the hooves of our Dali cavalry can step here. Yu Shanfang asked in a low voice, Iran, do you think it's possible that one day in the future, you'll become the first descendant of your Yunzai County's Guan family to obtain the title of a general? Thank you for your auspicious words. Thank you for your auspicious words. Guanyiran hurriedly bowed to express his gratitude. After straightening his back, he joked, can't you obtain the title as a hunting envoy? Yu Shanfang patted Guanyiran's shoulder. Since you're already a descendant of the Guan family, you have to keep a low profile and tone down your tone. Otherwise, just your Beijing accent alone is so annoying. What will happen in the future? Won't you have to be a girl for me and my brothers to touch every day? Guanyiran rubbed his chin. Makes sense, makes sense. At the peak of Sui Mountain, the golden-armored deity said helplessly, if you continue to waste time like this, I'll see how you'll survive in the future. How long has that busy Grand Chancellor delayed for you? No matter how much he admired your fallacious reasoning in the past, it's going to exhaust all of his goodwill towards you. The old scholar sat cross-legged, rubbing his ears with both hands. The sky wants to rain, and the mother wants to marry. Let him be. The golden-armored deity said slowly, according to the news, there's something wrong with the Hall of Ancestral Masters of Mount Longhu. That fire dragon spiritual master from the North Continent seems to have done more harm than good after that person delivered that sword strike. The old scholar laughed. How do you know that in the eyes of others, a great disaster isn't the result that this grand heavenly master of Mount Longhu with a different surname wants? The golden-armored deity was just casually mentioning it. Not to mention a grand heavenly master with a different surname, even if it was the grand heavenly master of Mount Longhu's grand heavenly master residence, he, the great god of Mount Sui, wouldn't care at all about what he did. However, the three grand chancellors of the academy who belonged to the three branches of the Confucian school respectively hit a wall with Bai Zi, that proud scholar, and the old scholar. They either returned empty-handed or couldn't even meet each other. Even the master deity of Mount Sui and the Great Peaks would feel worried. This was because the matter was too big and involved the most fundamental trend of the world. The old scholar said, compared to the other major schools of Confucianism, my students are considered very few. It can't be helped. I'm picky and no one can compare to me. The golden-armored deity sneered, is there any meaning in telling such nonsense to me alone? The old scholar nodded, it's more interesting than telling it to me alone. The golden-armored deity shut his mouth and didn't say anything. Seeing that this fellow didn't quarrel with him, the old scholar was a little disappointed. He could only continue, "Boss, Kui Dong is the most talented and likes to go down a dead end. This is the best attitude to have when it comes to learning. However, Kui Dong is too smart. He's been pessimistic about this world since the beginning. Let's talk about third brother first. Chi Jing Chun is the most knowledgeable. It's not as simple as just being the most knowledgeable. Even I, as a teacher, have to praise him as all-encompassing and magnificent. If he didn't have a teacher like me and was in the school of the Sage of Rites or the Second Sage, he might have achieved even more. Chi Jing Chun, on the other hand, is optimistic about this world. Back to second brother, left and right is the most stubborn. He's actually a very good person. When I was still living a poor life in the shabby alley, I let him manage the money. He's much more useful than a teacher like me who can't even hold on to a bag of money. Kui Dong said that he wanted to buy chess manuals, Chi Jingchun said that he wanted to buy books, and Alliance said that he wanted to drink wine. How could I not give him money? With my skinny bamboo pole, I'll definitely puff myself up at my own cost. Left and right are in charge of the money. Left and right's aptitude, knowledge, talent, and disposition aren't the best among the disciples, but he's the most balanced. Moreover, he's born with willpower. Therefore, even though he started learning the sword very late, it was really too fast. Yes, it was too fast. It was so fast that I panicked back then. I was afraid that he would become the first 14th level sword practitioner in the world in thousands of years. What should I do then? Don't think that this guy is far away from the mortal world. Left and right are the ones who are most afraid of loneliness. Although he has been far away from the mortal world for more than 100 years and has been wandering on the sea, what about left and right's true thoughts? What about me, his teacher, and his junior brother? Which teacher wouldn't like a disciple like this? I still remember that there was a great scholar who scolded me back then. He scolded me. It was indeed a little evil. How could I be calculative with him? He's just a small sage of the academy. He doesn't even have the qualifications to accompany the sacrifice. It would be too degrading for me to quarrel with such a junior. Left and right sneaked over and beat him up until he cried for his parents. Left and right were also honest. He actually foolishly admitted to it and even ran back to me to admit his mistake. Admit your mistake, admit your mistake. Don't you know how to cover your face and beat people up? After that, he ran away and refused to admit it. What can he do? Come and beat me. Can you beat left and right? Even if you can, left and right won't admit it. Can the deputy hierarch of that branch beat you to death? If he can beat you to death, can't I beat him to death? Sigh, that's why left and right are still stupid. As a bitter teacher, what else can I do? After all, Xiao Qi and the others are still watching. Then I'll just punish him. I have to bring left and right to apologize to him. I still have to do this and that and make up for it. It's so annoying. The golden-armored deity was puzzled. Left and right are willing to admit their mistakes to you. Why would they be willing to apologize to others? The old scholar rolled his eyes. Of course I have to reason with left and right in private. How can I be the disciple of the sage of literature if I beat him up so lightly? How can I stand up for your teacher? Left and right nodded silently. They agreed and said they would pay attention in the future. The golden-armored deity chuckled. I'm convinced. The old scholar sighed. As for fourth, it's more complicated. He can only be considered half a disciple. It's not that I don't want to acknowledge him. It's because he feels that his background isn't good and he doesn't want to cause trouble for me. Therefore, he doesn't acknowledge me. The reason is different on this point. In the end, it's still very similar to that disciple of mine who is in seclusion. Other than that, the registered disciples and the others all have their own merits. Among them, Maro Xiaodong is the most similar to me in terms of teaching and dispelling doubts. Of course, his knowledge is still not as high as mine. He follows the rules in everything he does. However, there's still some distance between him and the old man's so-called following one's heart and not overstepping the rules. It's a pity that others can't point this out. One can only figure it out and see through it on their own. Buddhism is extremely good when it comes to the saying of the Han. In this matter, Taoism isn't good enough. The old scholar didn't go into detail and didn't talk about it on a higher level. He changed the topic. When I quarrel with others, I never feel that I'm always right or good. Whether others are good or bad, I have to know. Otherwise, what's the point of quarreling? I say that I'm happy to say it, but where does my knowledge end up? Knowledge is most afraid of becoming rootless water that falls from the sky. It seems to be high and mighty, but other than a few flattering words from the scholars themselves, what's the point? It doesn't touch the ground, doesn't nourish the land, doesn't truly benefit the common people, doesn't give them a big basket or a small basket that says, there are thousands of hardships in life, but I have a place to put them in peace. In any case, it's just stuffing some paper articles into it, making people mistakenly think that only sages are qualified to talk about principles. It's tiring to death. How can you talk about teaching? The old scholar stood up, his body stooped. He looked into the distance and muttered, is it wrong to be good by nature? Great good. However, there's a very awkward question here. Since people are good by nature, why is the world so complicated? What exactly did the Confucian school of Confucianism teach? Did they teach people to be evil? Then what should I do? The old man and the sage of rights were both waiting, and then finally I came. I said that people are evil by nature, and within the same school, we sharpen each other, learn from each other, and improve. The key is that I can still stand and reason well, so I became the sage of literature. However, there's an even more awkward question. For an outsider like you think that evil by nature can become one of the branches of the Confucian school. That's fine, but can it really become the main branch of the Confucian school? The old scholar asked and answered his own question. It definitely can't. The old scholar raised his thumb and pointed to his heart. Even I think so. There was a long silence. The golden-armored deity let out a rare sigh with some regret. The old scholar didn't put away his thumb and suddenly sighed. Thinking about it this way, I really am a sage and a hero. Amazing, amazing. The golden-armored deity didn't say a word. The old scholar turned his head and said helplessly, why don't you refute me a little? That way I can convince people with reason. The golden-armored deity said indifferently, I won't give you such a chance. The old scholar made an O sound and said happily, then it seems that I have convinced people with virtue. The golden-armored deity took a deep breath. Otherwise, the old scholar suddenly said seriously, don't be in such a hurry to chase me away. I also want to learn from Bai Zi and the most frustrated scholar. Let's wait a little longer. Although I don't know what they are thinking, I also want to wait and see. The golden-armored deity asked, what if you wait until the end and you are wrong? Won't you regret it? The old scholar put his hands behind his back and smiled coldly. Regret? From me to these inner disciples, regardless of the choice we made, regret it? Not at all. On the golden arched bridge. The sword was inserted into the railings of the bridge. The tip of the sword and a small part of the blade had already sunk into the railings. Sparks flew everywhere and it was incomparably dazzling. The woman sitting at the side placed the umbrella horizontally across her knees. She stood up and opened up the seemingly ordinary oil paper umbrella. She raised her head to take a look and disappeared in a flash. Only the umbrella remained suspended in place. She stepped into a blessed land, right at the mouth of a well. The umbrella that was given away casually naturally had a deep meaning. It was just that the original owner gave it away, but the new owner might not live to find out the truth. But what did this have to do with the original owner? It was both a scheme and not a scheme. The Tao could be explained, but it could not be explained. Almost instantly, a tall old Taoist came to her side and smiled. Long time no see. She ignored him and looked around. She nodded and said, in the current situation, this is already considered a good move. The old Taoist smiled. Otherwise, how can I discuss the Tao with the Taoist ancestor? She glanced at him. The old Taoist looked calm. She stared at a certain part of this blessed land of lotus flowers and seemed to have understood something. She sneered. You have not forgotten your roots. The old Taoist laughed loudly and was very pleased. Taking advantage of the situation, turning the universe upside down and sinking a continent. She frowned. The old Taoist sighed. Now is not the same as before. She shook her head. It's just that I have changed masters. The old Taoist did not say anything. It was not good for him to comment on this matter. She asked, "It's just such a small piece of land." The old Taoist smiled. "It really can't be more than that." She seemed to have lost her interest and returned in disappointment. Her figure then disappeared, returning to her own world and putting away the tung leaf umbrella. The old Taoist stood beside the well and looked down, staring at the quiet well water. The old Taoist retracted his gaze and looked up at the sky. "This is my gift for returning to the green netherworld. What do you think?" In the lotus paradise that was connected to the lotus flower-blessed land, there was an old man who was still looking at a water droplet. He was looking at the water droplet falling on the uneven lotus leaves. The water droplet was the size of an ordinary raindrop, but many of the lotus leaves were as large as mountains. The larger ones were even as large as a province of the heavenly dynasties. Therefore, the veins of a single lotus leaf could be tens or hundreds of li long. Therefore, the path of a tiny water droplet, where it ultimately landed, waiting for the result to appear, would inevitably be an extremely long process. The old man was not anxious at all. Time flowed by slowly. However, as the existence of the biggest rule in the world, even the mighty long river of time had to take a detour when it flowed past the old man. 451. There are a lot of things happening this month, so I can only try to update between 120,000 to 150,000 words. The city was filled with lush greenery, but in the entire northern border of the Shahao country, there were almost no princes or princesses who were out for a spring outing. The three riders went north, and before they knew it, it was already summer. On this day, on a small mountain ridge at the border of the Shahao country, the three riders stopped to rest. Zheng Yi was busy cooking, and Ma Duyi was grooming herself in front of the mirror, humming a little tune. She was in a good mood. The small green bronze mirror in her hand was a spiritual weapon that she had picked up at a low price. It was a rare mirror made of sunlight and moonlight. She had used less than 2 taels of silver to bargain with the shopkeeper of the pawnshop for it. If it was placed at the immortal ferry, according to the old cultivator in charge of the eyes, Gui Jiang, it could be sold for at least 40 to 50 pieces of snow money. Chen Pinggan sat at the side and flipped through the account book. Most of the names had been lightly drawn with a red brush. These were the long-cherished wishes of those who had fulfilled their long-cherished wishes. However, the wishes of some otherworldly ghosts could only be put aside for the time being. In fact, Chen Pinggan and both of them knew that those wishes were very likely to be reduced to Buddhist wishes. In this life, regardless of whether it was yin or yang, it would be very difficult to fulfill them. Some of the otherworldly ghosts had formed a dead knot in their hearts. In their grief and indignation, they could not control their emotions, and their hostility skyrocketed. They almost directly turned into ferocious ghosts. They could only rely on the few mind-cleansing talismans that were posted in the King of Hell's palace to maintain their remaining spiritual intelligence. Ma Duyi, who was diligent and thrifty, did not complain about this matter. Mr. Chen wrote the mind-cleansing talismans again and again, and when the spiritual qi dissipated, he would replenish it again. It was simply a bottomless pit. Along the way, they encountered many defeated soldiers of the Shahao kingdom. They were scattered all over the mountains and forests, and they had become roving bandits. They gathered and dispersed randomly and crazily looted the provisions in Dallas rear. Among them, in order to survive and for the sake of righteousness in their hearts, they had to target the local people of the Shahao kingdom. At the end of last year, there were 3 consecutive heavy snowfalls. In addition to the chaos of war, the people in the northern territory of the Shahao kingdom were destitute. Even if these 300 to 400 soldiers at most wanted a small amount of food, the scattered and barren counties on the border relied on the small amount of stored food to survive until the next harvest. However, it was still not enough to satisfy the appetite of the Shahao kingdom's soldiers. Therefore, there were inevitably conflicts. One wanted to not starve to death, while the other wanted to live for the sake of the country. The conflicts became more and more intense. Chen Pinggan and his men encountered a conflict that almost turned into a bloody battle. One of the young soldiers in broken armor almost cut the shoulder of a thin old man. Chen Pinggan rushed in and held the Shihao kingdom's saber. In an instant, dozens of soldiers from the Shihao kingdom swarmed over. Chen Pinggan stomped his foot and the men and horses were thrown off their feet. Chen Pinggan threw the saber back in his hand and put it back into the young soldier's scabbard. His entire body was pushed back by the huge impact. Chen Pinggan did not say anything after that. He just stood on the street with his horse. The hungry soldiers quietly retreated from the county. Chen Pinggan and his men also slowly left. Behind them, the local people began to curse the soldiers of their country. They said all kinds of nasty things. They said that they did not have the ability to fight the Dali barbarians but bullied their own people. Each one was more impressive than the other. They should die on the battlefield so that they could avoid harming their own people in the future. Some people even suggested that they should send a message to the Dali cavalry in a nearby county. They might even be able to get a reward. After the cavalry left the county, the young soldier suddenly burst into tears. An old military officer who looked like a captain stopped his horse and cried. The entire group of soldiers, who were yellow and thin and almost all of them were injured, also stopped their horses and moved forward. They were panic-stricken and confused. Chen Pinggan asked Ma Duyi and Zheng Yi to stay where they were and rode away slowly. At their peak, this famous old battalion of cavalry at the border of the Shihao kingdom had more than 2,000 elite riders. Now, there were less than 80 of them left. They all looked like they were facing a great enemy. Chen Pinggan threw out a heavy bag and said in the official language of the Stonehair Kingdom, "Let's go. Take off your armors and waistcoats. Use this money as your travel expenses and settlement expenses." The old military officer caught the bag and opened it. It was full of official gold ingots. The old man looked up with a puzzled expression. Chen Pinggan said, "If you don't want to give up just like that, you can choose a few clever brothers to disguise themselves as merchants and go to those towns that have already settled down to buy grain. Try to avoid the spies and scouts of the Great Li and buy less grain every time. Otherwise, it will easily arouse the suspicion of the local authorities. Now, I believe that you can't tell who is on your side." The old military officer asked, "That's it? Do you have other requests?" Chen Pinggan nodded. "You don't have a choice right now. Since you are already in the worst situation, why don't you give it a try? Besides, if I want to rely on your dozens of heads to ask for rewards from the county government that has already surrendered to the Dali, there is no need to go through so much trouble. Your soldiers may not be able to see this point, but as a pure martial artist of the Fourth Realm, you should be able to see it clearly." The old military officer wanted to say something but stopped. Chen Pinggan waved his hand. "That's all I can help. I'm not a child of wealth. Don't treat me like a fool." The old military officer was resentful. He could only give up on the idea that was indeed not very kind. After generously putting away the bag of life-saving gold ingots, he cupped his fists and thanked the thin man in the green cotton robe. "Sir, you are very righteous." Chen Pinggan cupped his fists in return and left. As for the final decision of the Shihao Kingdom cavalry, they did not follow the young man's choice from beginning to end like the dog meat shop in the provincial capital. The old military officer was somewhat deflated. He hadn't even asked for the name. At that time, Ma Duyi saw Sir Chen galloping back and said teasingly, "You say you're not a child of wealth, but in reality..." Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "Seeing through but not speaking about it is a good habit to conduct yourself in this world." Ma Duyi was just about to say a few more words to him, but Chen Pinggan had already galloped away. He could only hurry along with Zheng Yi. The hooves of the three riders lightly stepped on the boundless earth in the warmth of spring. At this time, Ma Duyi put down the bronze mirror and turned his head to look at Chen Pinggan, who had already closed the account book. He asked, "Sir Chen, can we return to Book Slip Lake before autumn?" Chen Pinggan nodded and said, "More or less." Ma Duyi stretched himself and accidentally bumped into the big bamboo box behind him. He hurriedly reached out to hold it. The box was full of treasures that he had obtained at a low price from the three cities recently. Even if they were wrapped in silk and padded with cotton cloth, he was still worried that he would hurt those particularly delicate things. According to the old ghost who lived in the fake-colored glass pavilion, these were mostly treasures that the rich and powerful people in the human world liked. In troubled times, they were far less valuable than real gold and silver. However, in times of peace and prosperity, even a small bird food jar could be worth 200 or 300 taels of silver. It was not difficult for rich people who were fond of this kind of thing to double the price. These items could also be placed in Sir Chen's items. However, Ma Duyi liked to open the box and rummage through it every time they stopped. Just like the small bronze mirror that he loved so much that he couldn't bear to part with it. Taking it out for fun was asking for trouble. She carried it herself. Zheng Yi was now a true fourth realm cultivator. Ma Duyi's comprehension and aptitude were better. He was even a fifth realm otherworldly item. However, in terms of cultivation foundation, Zheng Yi was still better. This was the importance of one's foundation. One didn't mind being slow, the other didn't mind being fast. Zheng Yi and Ma Duyi were getting along more and more harmoniously. They had some chemistry. As they ate, Chen Pinggan still habitually chewed and swallowed slowly. Zheng Yi squatted at the side and ate big mouthfuls of rice. He asked casually, "Sir Chen, how's my boxing stance?" Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "It's sparse." Zheng Yi sighed. He originally thought that his six-step stance was not something that he could do easily. Practice makes perfect, and there was no way he could run away from it. Ma Duyi added fuel to the fire and said, "You're not cut out for martial arts. Even an outsider like me can see it clearly. Your boxing stance is empty and loose. You haven't even reached a higher level. Zheng Yi, do you still think it's pretty good?" Chen Pinggan comforted Zheng Yi, "Since martial arts is not your main business, it's enough to strengthen your body and help you grow your muscles and bones. Otherwise, if you produce a breath of pure true qi, it will clash with the spiritual qi in your qi residence. It won't be good." Zheng Yi said gloomily, "Either I can't learn anything, or I learn everything slowly. Sir Chen, why aren't you anxious?" Chen Pinggan was amused and said, "If being anxious was useful, I would be anxious with you too." Ma Duyi held back his laughter and was about to say something. Chen Pinggan raised his hand and said, "Shut up. Don't make fun of Zheng Yi's cultivation. Also, as for whether Zheng Yi's boxing stance is good or bad, it would be strange if you could tell. Senior just casually commented and borrowed it for you to use, right?" Ma Duyi smiled and narrowed his eyes. He didn't say anything, silently admitting it. The three of them continued to walk along the border of Shihao country. They came to a celestial sect in the northern region called Mount Yuluo. The scenery was beautiful and the spiritual qi was abundant. When Ma Duyi and Zheng Yi entered the boundary, they felt relaxed and happy. They couldn't help but take a few more breaths. In many places with barren spiritual qi, the common people might not even meet a single cultivator in their entire lives. That was the reason why merchants bustled about in search of profits, and cultivators walking in the mortal world would also subconsciously avoid places with thin spiritual qi. After all, there were too many things to pay attention to in cultivation, and it required painstaking effort. This was especially true for cultivators of the lower 5 realms, as well as the immortals of the middle 5 realms below the earth immortal realm. Wasting their precious time in a place with no spiritual qi within a radius of 1,000 miles was a kind of squandering. In the past, the chaos of war had spread to the mountains of Stonehair Kingdom. Later on, for some unknown reason, many small mountains had gathered together, vaguely taking Yuluo Mountain as the leader. Yuluo Mountain occupied a relatively large area. Previously, it had followed the path of a single immortal, belonging to a large family with few members. Therefore, many of the mountains in Yuluo Mountain were rented out to the low-level cultivator sects of Stonehair Kingdom who came to seek refuge. In just 2 years, Mount Yuluo had a good reputation. It was said that there were many celestial shops opened here. This was also the reason why Chen Pinggan came here. Since he was passing by, he let Zheng Yi and Ma Duyi see if they could sell the dozens of miscellaneous spiritual weapons that they picked up at a good price. All the celestial money that they got would belong to them. As for how to divide the spoils after the event, Chen Pinggan didn't care. He let Zheng Yi and Ma Duyi discuss it themselves. However, he estimated that Zheng Yi would suffer a big loss. With Ma Duyi's shrewdness, 3 Zheng Yis would not be her opponent. Chen Pinggan thought that if one day he opened a shop to do business, Ma Duyi would be a good helper. When they arrived at a mountaintop near the border of Yeluo Mountain, Chen Pinggan discovered that quite a number of refugees had been gathered there. The bazaar had been constructed quite well, and there was a boiling cauldron of voices. Along the way, there were many places that were in the process of breaking ground, bustling with activity. Other than the relatively strong young men, there were also many women and children who were able to make it to Yeluo Mountain alive. They were all working hard. What surprised Chen Pinggan the most was that the Shihao country's martial temple had already been completed. Although it was crude, it did not lack the necessary etiquette of the imperial court. In addition, there were some cultivators who were busy building the protective formation of the mountain. This was probably the earliest embryonic form of an immortal ferry or a sect on a mountain. 2 cultivators saw Chen Pinggan and company who were leading their horses. Facing these 3 unfamiliar faces, their eyes were filled with vigilance. They secretly contacted their fellow cultivators and gathered together from all directions to intimidate this group of outsiders. Chen Pinggan was no longer wearing the Verdant Gorge Island's jade pendant. There was nothing he could do about it. He asked one of the cultivators for directions and said that he wanted to go to the mountain where the ancestral hall of Mount Yuluo was located. The group of cultivators led by an old cultivator in the cave-dwelling realm pointed the way. When Chen Pinggan and company left the market, they heaved a sigh of relief and continued to work on the mountain and river formation. There was no other way. They were just a low-level sect. Even if they took refuge and moved to Mount Yuluo, compared to the other rich celestial mansions, they could not gather too much celestial money. They could only be thrown here by the ancestral hall of Mount Yuluo. When the door gods of Mount Yuluo arrived, if there was any trouble, such as Dallas cavalrymen who did not like the sight of Mount Yuluo, they would be the first to suffer. They could only brace themselves and block the disaster for Mount Yuluo. The establishment, rise, and inheritance of any sect on the mountain would inevitably involve hardships, humiliation, and danger. The old cultivator, who was already one of the ancestors in the cave-dwelling realm, stood on a high platform. His gaze quietly stopped on a refugee child who was helping his parents wipe their sweat. The old cultivator revealed a knowing smile. This was a good seedling. The ancestral hall of Mount Yuluo was aware of the situation and had planned to pay a small sum of money and a mountain with a radius of more than 10 miles to change the household register of this family. However, he stood his ground against the opinions of the masses and rejected Mount Yuluo's good intentions. Instead, he planned to personally take this child as his direct disciple. Perhaps after 60 years or 100 years, his sect would have another cultivator in the cave-dwelling realm. Perhaps even reaching the sea-viewing realm of the ancestor in the history of his sect would not be an extravagant hope. Thinking of this, the old cultivator was rather gratified. Although his fellow disciples in the ancestral hall quarreled fiercely at the beginning, after all, a small sum of money, especially an extra mountain, was of great significance. However, after rejecting the proposal of Mount Yuluo's ancestral hall, they were united as one. Even the stingiest youngest apprentice brother had decided that on the day of the child's apprenticeship ceremony, he would take out a spiritual item that he had kept for a long time and give it to his apprentice nephew. After Chen Pinggan left the market, he suddenly looked back and asked, "Did you see anything?" Zheng Yi and Ma Duyi were puzzled. Chen Pinggan shook his head and said, "Nothing. Maybe my eyes are playing tricks on me." Ma Duyi joked, "Mr. Chen, it's not good to speak halfway." Chen Pinggan laughed, "When you are able to take charge of your own affairs, you will know that speaking halfway is a subject worth studying." Ma Duyi clicked his tongue and said, "Mr. Chen, you are getting better at bragging about your abilities." Chen Pinggan turned around on horseback and gave a fist salute, "You flatter me." Ma Duyi laughed angrily, "Mr. Chen, if you continue to be like this, you will become the Mr. Chen in my heart." Zheng Yi shook his head and said, "You flatter me." It was obvious that this young man was more biased towards Mr. Chen. In the end, Ma Duyi suddenly stretched out his sleeve and slapped him in the face, causing him to feel a burning pain. Seng Yi said angrily, "A gentleman uses his mouth, not his fists." This time, it was Ma Duyi's turn to shake his head. "Only villains and women are difficult to deal with. Don't you understand this simple principle?" Chen Pinggan smiled bitterly. "That's not how you interpret it. However, since you are willing to mock yourself, I don't think there is a problem." The three of them laughed and joked along the way until they arrived at the real Mount Yuluor's entrance. Compared to the two immortal mountains they passed along the way, this place was imposing and had a different world. Compared to Mount Huangli, the spiritual qi here was even stronger. At the foot of the mountain, there was a peaceful small town beside a mountain and a river. Or rather, it was a relatively large village. Looking at the buildings, there should be more than 1,000 people living here. The so-called grandeur of the mountain, without the mortal world, became a pavilion in the sky, a river without a source. It was just that many immortal masters who had yet to reach the peak of the mountain were too lazy or disdainful to think like this. To reach the village at the foot of the mountain, and then to go up the mountain, they had to cross a river. It was not an arch bridge, but a slender serpent peacefully lying in the river. On its back, there was a villager leading a buffalo over. They should be heading to the nearby fields to work. Behind the strong young man and the water buffalo, there was a young child riding on a green bamboo. He shouted, "Giddy up," as if he was riding a horse. Chen Pinggan took the lead and stopped his horse, making way for the villager and the curved-horned water buffalo. After the villager and the water buffalo walked down the small bridge, it was obvious that they were experienced and knowledgeable. They did not look at the three outsiders. However, the young child riding on the bamboo horse saw a real horse and was very curious. Chen Pinggan smiled at the child. The child also smiled shyly and followed his father and the water buffalo to continue on their way. Seng Yi found it interesting. On the cloud-covered Yuluor mountain, there were often sword lights and rainbows cutting through the sky. However, the child obviously did not care about it. Instead, he was more curious about the horses beside them. The child riding the bamboo horse often looked back. Chen Pinggan took the lead and led the horse to the low stone bridge that was not too high above the river. Halfway there were also villagers who needed to go to the other side quietly waiting. After walking down the stone bridge, Chen Pinggan nodded to them to thank them. The villagers smiled and nodded back. Seng Yi was thoughtful. So was Ma Duyi. At this moment, Chen Pinggan suddenly turned his head and looked at the sky. The small wooden box of the sword tomb in his sleeve and the verdant canyon islands offering jade tablet almost simultaneously became boiling hot. Regarding this matter, Liu Zhimao did not hide it at first. He could use them to track Chen Pinggan's footsteps. Chen Pinggan had no objection to this. A cultivator's snow-white rainbow light broke through the sky from outside Yuluor Mountain and landed with a loud bang. It was Zhong Yi, an old cultivator of Verdant Canyon Island with a panicked expression and chaotic spiritual aura. He was in charge of the secret storehouse and the fishing room. This secret journey to the north almost exhausted the spiritual aura accumulated in several of Zhong Yi's natal aperture acupoints. This was a reckless act that damaged the foundation of the Great Tao. It was the same reason that the courier horse would inevitably hurt the horse if it rushed 800 miles to send a message, or even if it died one after another. Seng Yi's face was full of joy at first. After all, Zhong Yi was his benefactor who personally pulled him out of the fire pit on Misty Moon Island. However, when the teenager saw Zhong Yi's face, he immediately shut up. Chen Pinggan supported the swaying Zhong Yi and asked softly, "Is there a change in the calligraphy lake?" Zhong Yi said miserably, "The weather has changed." Chen Pinggan sighed. He had expected this situation to happen. However, because it was not the worst situation, Chen Pinggan did not do too much to deal with it. In fact, he could not do too many effective measures. After all, there was a limit to human power. It was very simple. Either Su Gaoshan, the chief of Dali, or the person behind Liu Laocheng of Gonglu Island had begun to enter the game. Or both sides had joined hands. Tan Yueni of Grain Island had changed sides and only wanted to protect herself. Liu Zhimao could not bear to give up the foundation of Verdant Canyon Island and was schemed against. It was normal to be in danger. However, this was definitely not good news for Chen Pinggan at the moment. Chen Pinggan had already grasped the situation of Calligraphy Lake. The chessboard that he had painstakingly set up might have been casually overturned by later players. Zhong Yi knelt down with a thud. "Please save the island master, Mr. Chen." Chen Pinggan shook his head and asked directly, "Have Jiyu Kan and his mother been secretly detained by Senior Zhong?" Zhong Yi, who was kneeling on the ground, raised his head. "It happened so suddenly. Verdant Canyon Island could not do such a thing. Even if they could, I would not do it because I know it will only backfire. The only one who can save the island master is Mr. Chen." Chen Pinggan helped Zhong Yi up and said slowly, "Senior Zhong, please get up and speak. I will listen to you first. However, it is almost impossible to save Liu Zhimao. I believe you already knew this when you were on your way here. The reason why you came here is to do your best and leave the rest to fate." Zhong Yi nodded gently and smiled bitterly. There was a hint of gratitude in his eyes. Chen Pinggan was having a headache. In front of Zhong Yi, some words were just like the joke with Ma Duyi. He only said half of it and did not say it out loud. Zhong Yi naturally did his best. However, it was very likely that Zhong Yi also knew that his whereabouts had fallen into the eyes of some people. Perhaps they were overlooking this place from somewhere in Yuluo Mountain. Therefore, Chen Pinggan did not kick him when he was down and kill him with a punch. In fact, he had already done his best. Chen Pinggan said, "Let's talk as we walk." Zhong Yi steadied his mind. His first sentence shook the hearts of Ma Duyi and Zheng Yi, who were listening attentively. "Our island master was not a match for an unknown cultivator. He has been seriously injured and detained in the water prison of Gongliu Island. Not only that, the general of Great Li's cavalry, Su Gaoshan, has personally arrived at Cloud Tower City by the Bookslip Lake. He threw his whip into the lake and threatened to kill all the wild cultivators of the Bookslip Lake within 10 days. Chen Pinggan's first thought was that the powerful cultivator who could suppress Liu Zhimao was the Mohist ranger Shu Ruo or the sage Wan Tan. 452, Zhong Ya, who had come from afar, and Chen Pinggan, who was leading his horse, walked side by side along the gurgling river that resembled a green ribbon. Perhaps it was because of this paradise with pleasant scenery, tranquility, and peace, or perhaps it was because there was an accountant who was half a family by her side. The old cultivator Zhong Ya, who had experienced countless storms, gradually calmed down. She slowly told Chen Pinggan about the incident at the Lake of Slips. It turned out that everyone had underestimated Su Gaoshan's appetite. He was one of the main generals of the Dali Iron Cavalry, who had been eyeing the Zhu dynasty. After taking down the capital of the Shihao kingdom almost effortlessly, he not only turned his horse around, but also led his iron cavalry to another Zhu vassal state. Even though the war was equally fierce, he still had the leisure to come to Scroll Lake and publicly show up, threatening to wipe out the Scroll Lake. Those who complied would prosper, and those who disobeyed would perish. It was as simple as that. The so-called obedience was even more straightforward. The wild cultivators who were willing to hand over all their belongings and become the lowest-ranking Dali cultivator to attack the Zhu dynasty could live and leave the Scroll Lake. Those who were willing to hand over half of their belongings and become the lowest-ranking cultivator of the Dali army to attack the Zhu dynasty could stay at Scroll Lake for the time being. However, they still had to listen to the orders of the Dali Iron Cavalry in the future. As for Palace Willow Island, at the end of spring this year, a group of foreign cultivators had appeared and became the honored guests of Palace Willow Island. With Su Gaoshan's public appearance, they talked nonsense to the tens of thousands of wild cultivators in the Book Lake. Just last night, under the personal leadership of Liu Larocheng, they rushed to Verdant Canyon Island without warning. One of the old cultivators was undoubtedly a cultivator of the Upper Five Realms after Liu Larocheng broke the Verdant Canyon Island's mountain and river formation. Undoubtedly, he was a cultivator of the Upper Five Realms. With his full strength, he was able to destroy the entire Hengbo mansion. After that, this cultivator, who had been waiting for him, used a dozen magic treasures to form a formation and captured Liu Zhimao, who was trying to escape, and escorted him to Palace Willow Island. Seeing that the situation was not good, Zhong Ya did not go to die. Instead, she sneaked out of Verdant Canyon Island through a secret underwater passage and rushed to Shihao Kingdom. With the offering jade token, she found Chen Pinggan. Chen Pinggan did not say a word. After listening to Zhong Yue's story, he asked, "What's Liu Laocheng's attitude?" Zhong Yue shook her head and said, "After the incident at Scroll Lake, we found out that almost all the Earth Immortals went to Palace Willow Island and captured our island owner back to Palace Willow Island. Liu Laocheng never said a word, nor did he see a local cultivator at Scroll Lake." Zhong Yue sighed with emotion. "Although I hate Liu Laocheng, I have to admit that this is what a wild cultivator of the upper 5 realms should do." Chen Pinggan said, "Now, there should be many wild cultivators at Scroll Lake cursing Liu Laocheng as a traitor of Scroll Lake and a lackey of Dali." Zhong Yue smiled bitterly. Thousands of islands and tens of thousands of wild cultivators. Everyone can't even take care of themselves. They are almost scared out of their wits. I guess people will tremble at the mention of Liu Laocheng and Su Gaoshan. Zhong Yue shook her head gently. What little backbone and integrity is left of Scroll Lake is completely gone. Like the dangerous and sincere cooperation we had earlier to kill the foreign nascent soul cultivators and golden core sword cultivators, we won't talk about it anymore. Liu Laocheng, Liu Laocheng. I really can't imagine how great the profit was for Liu Laocheng to do this, to the point of selling the entire Scroll Lake. The gatekeeper of Red String Mansion, Hong Su, was ordered by me to go out and search for her for almost 10 years before I found the reincarnation of the previous female ruler of the Jianghu world. I brought her back to Verdant Canyon Island, so I know that Liu Laocheng is not as indifferent to Scroll Lake as the rumors say. Zhong Yue's expression was gloomy. He stopped and squatted by the river, washing his face with water. Compared to the time when he fought with Liu Zhimao at Scroll Lake, where the island was beaten by an Earth Immortal and sank to the bottom of the lake, Zhong Yue seemed to be more worried and helpless. As he grew older, it was inevitable that his spirit would decline. In particular, Zhong Yue only had 60 years left to live. Even if he wanted to die together with the enemy, he was willing to be cut into pieces. But would he agree? It was just a matter of moving a finger, and he, a Dragon Gate realm cultivator, who was considered to be quite impressive in the Scroll Lake, would be reduced to ashes on the spot. Chen Pinggan led the horse with the saber and sword at his waist. He said indifferently, "As long as a person like Liu Laocheng makes up his mind to return to Scroll Lake, he definitely won't do it for a ruler of the Jianghu world." When he went to Verdant Canyon Island to suppress Jiyu Kan and the descendant of the true dragon, it was just a cover-up. In fact, if he didn't make a move, all the wild cultivators at Scroll Lake could only wait for death and be slaughtered. Because apart from Liu Zhimao, almost no one saw the general trend of the Aquarius continent and thought that Scroll Lake could stay out of it. Maybe they even thought that it would be better for the outside world to be in chaos, so that they could fish in troubled waters. Just like the Battle of the Shijiao Kingdom this time, many wild cultivators at Scroll Lake took the opportunity to infiltrate. I believe many of them made a lot of money. But they didn't expect that they would be raided right after they made a small fortune. They didn't know who they were working for after hundreds of years of hard work. Zhong Yue, who had been squatting by the river, said helplessly, "You can't blame Scroll Lake for being blind. To put it bluntly, other than our Verdant Canyon Island, there are also enemies like Green Tomb and Heavenly Grandmother Island. If they want to ride on the Dali cavalry's coattails, they have to see if they are willing to stretch their legs and walk into the temple with a pig's head." Chen Pinggan nodded and said, "That's true." Zhong Yang stood up and exhaled. "But if you are really smart and dare to bet big, you should have come to the Shijiao Kingdom earlier to contact the Dali cavalry and take the initiative to submit a certificate of allegiance to a general. Then, as long as you are recorded by the spies at the Dali Green Wave Pavilion, you will have made a lot of money now. In the future, when Scroll Lake redistributes its power, there will be a lot of benefits. Our Verdant Canyon Island has actually done very well. Our loss is that we haven't been able to contact Su Gaoshan and only stayed at Tan Yuan's side on Grain Island. In addition, Liu Laocheng interfered, and all our efforts were in vain." Chen Pinggan frowned and thought deeply. After a moment of silence, he asked doubtfully, "Senior Zhong, do you know if there have been any big sect immortal mansions in the Aquarius continent in the past 10 years that wanted to change their sects? Even if there is a small sign of it, have you heard of such a rumor?" Zhongyang shook his head and said, no. For example, as the leader of the Aquarius continent, old sect Master Qi of the Divine Expanse sect, has just become a Lord of Heaven and is as stable as a mountain. The Divine Expanse sect is also a group of Taoist immortals with peaceful cultivation and has never shown any signs of expansion. I heard from the Island Master that the Divine Expanse sect seems to have recalled a group of Taoist priests. It is very unusual. The Island Master even guessed that the Divine Expanse sect might have discovered a new cave paradise and needed to send people into it. In addition, there seems to be no sign of such a sign in Marshall Mountain, Wind Snow Temple, the Jiang family of Yunlin, and Old Dragon City. Chen Pinggan nodded. I see. Zhong Yue's heartstrings were stretched taut, then suddenly relaxed. She was extremely tired and her expression was haggard. But when she saw the face of the accountant next to her, Zhongyang smiled. Even Mr. Chen didn't complain. If she acted like a little girl, wouldn't she have lived for hundreds of years in vain? Zhongyang told Chen Pinggan that the last discussion with Liu Zhimao in the Hengbo mansion was not to speak up for Liu Zhimao, but to tell the truth. The old people of the Scroll Lake left one by one, and the new people were more domineering. Zhongyang, who was the first to be a proper immortal genealogy master, could not find anyone to talk to. She never thought that she would meet a cultivator who was as strenuous and unrewarding as her. Once she started talking, she talked a little too much. She paid attention to the thin young man's expression and saw that he was not impatient. Zhongyang was relieved. Chen Pinggan listened patiently. When Zhongyang had nothing to say, Chen Pinggan reminded her softly, Senior Zhong, you'd better not return to the Scroll Lake. It's useless no matter what you do. It's better to wait and see. Zhongyang shook her head and said with emotion, where can I go? The Verdant Canyon Island is my home. If this hadn't happened, I wouldn't have minded looking for a summer resort around the Scroll Lake to spend the rest of my life in peace. Chen Pinggan hesitated. Senior Zhong, let me ask you something else. In the eyes of the old cultivators of the Dragon Gate State, or did Liu Zhimao mention that when you pass by a place, you can feel it and vaguely see the atmosphere? Zhongyang shook her head. The Island Master never mentioned this. At least, I don't have this ability. Involving the flow of fate energy is the specialty of the gods of mountains and rivers. Presumably, even the Earth Immortals can't see it clearly. As for the Island Master, a great cultivator who is only one step away from entering the upper 5 states, it's hard to say whether he can do it or not. After all, when the gods observe the mountains and rivers, they only see the real thing, not the illusory fate energy. Chen Pinggan was hesitant to speak. Zhongyang suddenly laughed and said, why, Mr. Chen? Is it so hard to be a good person? It's obviously for the sake of others, but you have to weigh it more carefully than your own. Mr. Chen, there's something I shouldn't have said before, but now, we can't be considered friends. It's just that it's hard to say whether Zhong Di will live or die tomorrow, so I won't stand on ceremony with you. I just want to talk to you. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, Senior Zhong, go ahead. Zhongyang stared at the young man in front of her and did not speak for a long time. Then she said with a laugh, all of a sudden, I have nothing to say. What should I do? Chen Pinggan had no choice but to take off the blade-strengthening gourd and drink to refresh himself. Even just hearing about the changes in the Verdant Canyon Island was very exhausting. It was like pulling one hair and affecting the whole body. Many subsequent calculations were even more exhausting. Chen Pinggan said, there's a small hill in the easternmost part of the Falcon Mountain that has just been moved here. I saw some strange phenomena there. If Senior Zhong trusts me, why don't you settle there first and take it as a relief? Now, the worst-case scenario is that Liu Zhimao dies on Palace Willow Island and is killed as a warning to others. At that time, no one can stop Elder from doing what he wants, not even me. It's better than going back now. You might be regarded as an invisible provocation and be imprisoned in the water prison of Palace Willow Island. Senior, you might not be afraid of this and even be happy to see Liu Zhimao again. But now, only the Hengbo prefecture has suffered, and even the vassal states including Plainscale Island have not been affected. This means that once there is a turning point in the future, the Verdant Canyon Island needs someone to stand up. I can't and I don't want to, But Zhongyang is the most trusted elder of the Verdant Canyon Island. Even though her realm is not high, she can convince others. Zhongyang thought about it carefully and nodded. She laughed at herself and said, I have a hard life. Zhongyang suddenly told Chen Pinggan with the voice of the Heart Lake, be careful of Palace Willow Island. Someone is using me as bait. If it's true, why did they do this instead of simply using Jiu Kan and the Spring Court Prefecture as bait? I don't understand. There must be a reason behind it. Of course, Mr. Chen, you should know that I'm just pretending to be obedient and asking for peace of mind. The moment I left the Verdant Canyon Island, I have already put the burden on Mr. Chen's shoulders. Chen Pinggan smiled knowingly and said, it's still necessary to be polite. At least the other party will feel better. This is also a small principle I just learned from a young man named Guan. Zhongyang joked, Mr. Chen, do you still want to learn from others? Chen Pinggan pointed at Zhongyang and then pointed at Ma Duyi and Zheng Yi. Then, he pointed at the village at the foot of Mount Yaluo and casually drew a circle. There are many principles outside of books. Let's just talk about a small matter. Even the villagers in the countryside know to be polite when crossing the bridge. How many cultivators high up on the mountain are willing to practice such a small principle? Am I right? The depression in Zhongyang's heart was slightly relieved. Then I'll go to the small mountain that Mr. Chen mentioned and take a look and find some principles. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, why not? Zhongyang looked around. How many years had it been since she could calm down and see the human scenery at the foot of the mountain? Chen Pinggan said, I won't rush back to the Book Lake immediately for Liu Jimao. I still have my own things to do. Even if I go back, I will only do what I can. Zhongyang nodded. If we just met and heard this answer, I would be burning with anxiety. But now, I'm not in the mood. I don't dare and don't want to force you. Mr. Chen, just do things according to your own ideas. Chen Pinggan and Zhongyang said almost at the same time, we still have to be polite. The two looked at each other and smiled. Zhongyang straightened her clothes and left. She no longer turned into a rainbow and rode the wind. She walked across the small bridge and slowly left. Chen Pinggan took Ma Duyi and Zheng Yi with him and led the horses through the village's bluestone path. After climbing the mountain, they passed through the gate of Mount Yuluo. It was not 1,000 miles away. There was only a small memorial archway, and there was not even a cultivator guarding the door. The cultivators of Mount Falcon had a single lineage. Even if there was more than one lineage in the ancestral hall, they could still be counted on one's fingers. Excluding the consecrators and guests, the true cultivators of Mount Falcon numbered no more than 20. However, on Mount Falcon, there was a place similar to the Heavenly Street of Bronze Leaf Island and the Apes Wailing Street of Kaishui City. After all, cultivators cultivated the Tao and used silver to pave the way. This was an unchangeable principle, so Mount Falcon was not too deserted. Chen Pinggan looked back. Zhongyang's figure was already nowhere to be seen. If Zhongyang did not get the answer she wanted from him, and Liu Jimao was imprisoned and became a prisoner of Palace Willow Island, and was even likely to be decapitated, wouldn't Zhongyang be disappointed? She would definitely be extremely disappointed. But disappointment was one thing, but what to do after disappointment, or how to do it, depended more on one's temperament and skills. Therefore, Chen Pinggan respected people like Zhongyang and Guan Yiran, as well as the ghost general of Shihao Kingdom, Huang Lizhan and Su Xinzhai, whom he met by chance at the Ling official temple. We never knew when we were walking on the muddy road of suffering, whether we would encounter a bigger storm and snow, whether we would meet one or two good people, like a flickering lamp. Chen Pinggan invited the ghost who was a cultivator of Guanhai State when he was alive to take a look at Ma Duyi and Zheng Yi. On the street of Mount Yaluo, Ma Duyi shopped around all the shops, big and small. She compared the goods to 3 different shops. Some were selling spiritual weapons, some were buying. She and Zheng Yi already had a share of the loot. She would even help Zheng Yi to come up with a plan. In the current realm, which spiritual weapon should be bought was the most cost-effective. She should not blindly seek for the best and be greedy for the quality. Although Zheng Yi was picky and often envious, he would still listen to Ma Duyi's advice. Chen Pinggan saw this and laughed in his heart. Because it was an immortal shop, some of the treasures that had been eaten for decades or centuries, or had just been bought at a low price, were often added to the business of immortals. This was similar to when Chen Pinggan bought the painting of the court lady and the great imitation canal yellow sword, and the old shopkeeper gave him 3 small things that didn't cost a copper coin. Every time this happened, the old ghost would come out. Cultivators who had cut themselves off from the mortal world, even if they were merchants, might not be able to judge the quality and value of antiques from the secular dynasties. Therefore, Chen Pinggan and his group picked up some leftovers. They returned with a full load. They left Mount Falcon. Chen Pinggan still followed the established route, walking on the border of Shihao Kingdom, passing through the cities and passes, fulfilling the last wishes of the otherworldly creatures and ghosts, big or small. However, during this period, he kept a close eye on the movements of the Lake of Slips. It was similar to a cultivator in a shop in Mount Falcon buying a stack of old imperial newspapers at a low price. The news about the Lake of Slips was mostly trivial. In April, when the water was too small to be full, if he were in the small town of Lizhu Wonderland, he would have to be very careful about the competition for water in the fields. Otherwise, it would affect the annual harvest. When Chen Pinggan was about to return to the Lake of Slips, he received an Immortals Imperial newspaper that was widely circulated in the north of Shihao Kingdom, which recorded several big news. The general of the other Dali cavalry, Cao Yarrow, was extremely bold in using his troops. He took the risk and divided his troops into 3 groups, leaving only the middle army to stay in the same place to confront the army of the Zhu dynasty at the border. The other 2 cavalry groups successively broke through 2 vassal states of the Zhu dynasty. Of course, they didn't annex them. Instead, they completely scattered the field troops of the 2 vassal states that could be freely deployed. Many troops could only shrink, relying on the big cities and towns to form their own camps, trapped in a corner. This gave Cao Yarrow's cavalry more freedom. The refugees of the 2 countries crazily poured into the border of the Zhu dynasty. Envoys from the vassal states' temples constantly went to the capital of Zhu dynasty. They cried for their parents, kowtowed and bled, and begged the Zhu army to save the people, so that they could decisively attack and fight the barbarians of the Dali outside the city. Because of this, the general who guarded the border of Zhu and confronted Cao Yarrow was criticized. The infamy of his cowardice spread throughout the Zhu dynasty. There was even a rumor that he had secret dealings with the Dali. The Zhu dynasty was forced to be divided into 2 camps, the main camp and the main camp. The civil and military were mixed together, on and off the mountain. In the court, the Zhu emperor was so angry that he directly flicked his sleeves and dismissed the court to discuss the matter later. If this was only a major event in the human world. Then, in the recent summer, a shocking event happened on the mountain. Wei Jin of the Wind Snow Temple found the great cultivator from another continent who was temporarily cultivating in the central area of the Aquarius continent, the Lord of Heaven Xieshe of the North Continent. After the battle, Wei Jin left the Aquarius continent alone and went to the inverted mountain on his sword. There were only a few spectators in the battle on the mountain. The outcome of the battle on the mountain was not leaked. But since Xieshe continued to stay in the Aquarius continent, the Taoist Lord of Heaven who had already angered the people of the Aquarius continent definitely did not lose. However, even if Wei Jin could not defeat Xieshe with one sword, the cultivators of the Aquarius continent did not have any complaints about the land sword celestial who had just entered the upper 5 states. They only felt honored as a cultivator of the same continent. The sword cultivators of the Aquarius continent were especially proud. This was a major event on the mountain that attracted the attention of the entire continent. Among them, there was also a matter that attracted the attention of a mountain in the central area of the Aquarius continent. A cultivator from the martial arts mountain named Ma Kuxuan, who was not even 20 years old and had only cultivated for a few years, had unexpectedly killed 2 golden core sword cultivators in 2 battles. It was said that Ma Kuxuan had hidden his trump card. The Zhu dynasty chose to remain silent because Ma Kuxuan's guardian of the martial arts mountain and the members of the royal family of the Zhu dynasty were watching from the side. There was no problem with Ma Kuxuan's attack. It was just and honorable. For a time, Ma Kushwan's name spread throughout the entire Aquarius continent. After the young full moon, especially during the rainy season, there was a lot of dampness and evil qi. Whether it was a cultivator or an ordinary teacher, they all had to pay attention to nurture the yang qi and resist the dampness and evil qi. When Chen Pinggan and the other two rode north, they took a route to the east of the capital of the Shihao kingdom. When they went south, they changed their route. On this day, in the heavy rain, Chen Pinggan and the other two rested in a dilapidated pavilion with their horses. Chen Pinggan's heart skipped a beat. The wooden box in his sleeve trembled and was slightly hot. Unexpectedly, a messenger flying sword that should never have appeared had arrived. Liu Zhimao had already been detained in the water dungeon. It was impossible for him to have the ability to control his own small sword to send a message to him under the eyes of Liu Larocheng and that group of strange cultivators. Chen Pinggan even planned to ignore it. But after weighing the pros and cons, he carefully put away the messenger flying sword that was indeed Liu Zhimao and opened the restriction on the flying sword. The secret letter only had 3 sentences. You have to be careful on this trip back to the Book Lake. The reason for this warning has nothing to do with you, Chen Pinggan, and it has nothing to do with our established business. It is purely because I can't stand some people's faces. To show my sincerity, I borrowed Liu Zhimao's flying sword. Intercept the flying sword, there is no need to reply. After Chen Pinggan put away the wooden box, he fell into deep thought. There was no doubt that it was the work of Liu Larocheng of Palace Willow Island. But as to why it was so, it was worth pondering. Liu Laocheng's honest warning was definitely not the superficial change of the situation at the Book Lake. There was no need for Liu Larocheng to tell Chen Pinggan about it. Chen Pinggan was not blind or deaf, and Zhongyi had come to inform him. With Liu Laocheng's meticulousness and ambition, he would not waste his breath on this kind of thing. Then Liu Laocheng's so-called warning and caution must be more subtle. It was very likely that it was related to Chen Pinggan himself. Chen Pinggan stood at the edge of the constantly leaking small pavilion and looked at the gloomy curtain of rain outside. Now, there was a worse result waiting for him. Zhongyi had escaped from the Book Lake with the help of the hidden secret passage of the verdant canyon island. It might have been within the expectations and calculations of some people behind the scenes. But why didn't they directly attack Jiyu Kan and the Spring Court Mansion? Why didn't they choose a simpler and more effective method to force him to rush to the Book Lake? Why didn't they directly kill him? Chen Pinggan sighed and murmured, "Is it another battle of the Great Path? Then it makes sense that it wasn't a sect from the Aquarius continent. Was it the Tongyi sect where Du Maro was? Or Taiping Mountain? Definitely not it. The first sect I passed by in the Tongyi continent, the Fuxia sect. But I was just passing by with Lu Tai at that time. There should be no conflict between us. The Battle of the Great Path also has a difference in strength and width. The other party must be a cultivator of the upper 5 states to be able to chase me all the way to the Aquarius continent. So the possibility of it being the Fuxia sect is not high." Chen Pinggan frowned, but it doesn't look like the old Abbey Dean with the supreme Taoist power. The Great Path on his side shouldn't be so small. Chen Pinggan suddenly turned his head and said, "Sengyi, Ma Duyi, you don't have to accompany me back to the Book Lake. Go directly to the border of the Shihao Kingdom and Mayu Kingdom and wait for me at Liuxia Pass." Sengyi wanted to say something, but Ma Duyi pulled his sleeve. Chen Pinggan turned back and continued to look at the curtain of rain. They parted at the pavilion. He rode south alone. The thick green cotton robe was replaced by a thin, fitting green shirt. Chen Pinggan arrived at Green Tong City in the boundary of the Book Lake without any trouble. Green Tong City was, after all, a power at the edge of the Book Lake. The undercurrents and changes at the Book Lake, as well as Su Gaoshan's shocking words and actions at Pond City, to the local residents of Green Tong City, whether they were the idle cultivators who could not establish their own sects or the commoners who were begging for food, the bigger the matter, the quieter it was. Because under the general trend, what else could they do if they did not accept their fate? It was especially so for the local ordinary people. The outside world was so chaotic. Even if they had some savings, where could they move to? Did they dare to? Green Tong City had many delicacies. Chen Pinggan randomly found a bun shop and was pleasantly surprised. He bought 2 buns. He loved them, so he bought 2 more. It had been a long time since Chen Pinggan felt 90% full. The shop was newly opened, and the shopkeeper was very young. He was not a teenager. Business was good. On his way from Green Tong City to Pond City around the border of the Book Lake, Chen Pinggan inquired about some news. Compared with the war-torn Shihao Kingdom, the gossip here was obviously closer to the truth. More than half a year had passed at the familiar ferry in Pond City, but the ferry was still quietly tied to the shore. Even though Liu Zhimao had completely lost his power on the Verdant Canyon Island, his identity as the first Minister of Offerings still carried some weight. On the way here, he left the horse at an inn. Chen Pinggan gave the inn a sum of money and asked them to feed it. The third finger represented the great heat. Steam rose from the entire Book Lake, making it look like a huge steamer. It was hard to imagine that when he left the Book Lake, this place was still full of snow-white landscape paintings. Chen Pinggan returned to the Verdant Canyon Island alone. After stopping the boat and crossing the mountain gate, the old cultivator at the gate was still listless. When he saw the accountant returning to the Verdant Canyon Island, he was still smiling. For example, Island Master Liu Zhimao's disappearance, the ruined Hengbo mansion, and Commander Da Li's lashing of the Scroll Lake didn't affect this old cultivator's leisurely days. Chen Pinggan greeted the old cultivator, chatted for a while, and opened the door. There was nothing unusual except for some dust. Before leaving the Verdant Canyon Island, he had said that this place did not need to be cleaned. Chen Pinggan first went to the Hengbo mansion, which had become ruins and could no longer be rebuilt. He stood at the edge of the ruins and was silent for a moment. Then he turned around and walked to the Spring Court mansion. Now the Verdant Canyon Island was leaderless. Zhong Ya, who could barely maintain the situation, had disappeared. Lord Tianhu, Liu Zhimao's first disciple on the Plain-Scale Island, was actually in seclusion because of this matter. In addition, Ji Yukan had lost his little loach. Yu Gui, the first Minister of Offerings on the Vassal Islands, and some of Liu Zhimao's disciples and the Ministers of Offerings on the Vassal Islands, were now secretly communicating with each other. During this time, the Spring Court Mansion seemed to be prosperous without Hengbo Mansion and Liu Zhimao, but in fact, it was quite torturous. Even if the sky fell, there would be a higher place to hold it up. Now that Liu Zhimao was like this, who would be next? Everyone in the Spring Court Mansion, no matter how ignorant they were of the general situation, knew what was going on. Ji Yukan's mother was already waiting at the main entrance with 2 young and beautiful maidservants. The spies in the Spring Court Mansion still had some spies. The woman walked quickly to Chen Pinggan and said softly, "Pingan, why are you getting thinner?" Chen Pinggan sighed in his heart, but he still smiled and said, "I've been wandering around the Shijiao Kingdom and often slept in the open. But I'm used to it, so it's fine." "Where's Ji Yukan?" The woman smiled and said, "After you left the Verdant Canyon Island, he liked to walk alone on the island. I don't know where he is now. A dog can't stop itself from eating **T. He's been like this since he was young. Every time it's mealtime, I have to shout at him loudly. Now I can't do it anymore. No matter how loud I shout, Tinkan can't hear me when she's far away. Auntie wasn't used to it at first." Chen Pinggan smiled and nodded. "Then I'll wait for him here. Once we're done talking, I'll leave the Book Lake immediately." The woman was disappointed. "Why are you in such a hurry?" Chen Pinggan nodded. The woman chatted with Chen Pinggan, mostly reminiscing about the past. Chen Pinggan also talked about Ma Kuxuan's recent situation in the Mud Bottle Alley and Apricot Blossom Alley. The woman sighed with emotion. She didn't expect that the little fool who was bullied back then would be so successful now. It was a pity that Granny Ma, who had the worst mouth, couldn't see her grandson's good side and didn't have a life of happiness. Speaking of this, the woman seemed to be reminded of the past. She turned her head and wiped the corners of her eyes with a silk handkerchief. About an hour later, Ji Yukan slowly returned to the Spring Court Mansion. He saw his mother and Chen Pinggan waiting at the door. Ji Yukan, who was as tall as a young man from the northern land, The devil incarnate of the book lake who made people forget his real age, still didn't speed up. When he reached the door, Ji Yukan greeted the woman, then looked straight at Chen Pinggan and said softly, "You're back?" Chen Pinggan nodded and said, "I've heard about what happened on the Verdant Canyon Island. There are some things I need to tell you." The woman tactfully said goodbye and left. Chen Pinggan led Ji Yukan to the ruins of the Hengbo mansion and said slowly, "The more chaotic it is, the more you can't be impatient. It's not advisable to make mistakes in a hurry." Ji Yukan nodded. Chen Pinggan asked, "Did you know that Yuan Yuan of Huangsheng Island has joined Dallas' side?" Ji Yukan still nodded. "I heard that there are no walls in the world that don't have ears. After meeting you last time, LV Caisong didn't come even once. Instead, Han Jingling and Huang he came to the Verdant Canyon Island after Su Gaoshan showed up and Liu Zhimao got into trouble. Huang he even wanted to enter your house to take a look, but I refused. He didn't look too good at that time." Chen Pinggan glanced at Ji Yukan smiled. "I know I'm not smart, but I'm not that stupid, right?" Chen Pinggan nodded. "Don't be disappointed in people like Han Jingling and Huang He. That would be stupid. At the same time, don't be disappointed in LV Caisong. She's not smart enough. You are true friends. Since you are friends, you should put yourself in her shoes and consider her situation. LV Caisong also has her own sect and responsibilities. True friends should be more considerate. The world is complicated, so don't expect perfection. It's best if you have it, but if you don't, then keep your feelings to yourself. Maybe one day in the future, a best friend will come to you. At that time, it won't be too late to drink to your heart's content." Ji Yukan was silent. "Chen Pinggan, isn't it too late for me to listen to your reasoning now?" Chen Pinggan shook his head. "It's not too late," Ji Yukan said, "but I'm still the same Ji Yukan. What should I do?" Chen Pinggan said, "A little better is a little better. One more reason is better." The two didn't say anything else. They walked to the old site of the Hengbo Manor that was in ruins. Chen Pinggan asked, "Do you want to leave the Lake of Slips with me? We'll come back, just like I did this time." Ji Yukan asked, "Then what about my mother?" Chen Pinggan didn't give an answer. He only gave a choice. Ji Yukan shook his head. "I know you're doing this for my own good, but I won't leave. I won't feel at ease if I leave. Even if I'm useless here, I won't be able to live with myself if I leave just like this. I've already let you down, and I've let the little loach down. I can't let my mother down as well. I still won't regret it. Chen Pinggan, if you want to scold me, scold me." Chen Pinggan didn't insist on his own opinion, nor did he scold Ji Yukan. Ji Yukan felt a little strange. Chen Pinggan folded his hands in his sleeves. He looked at the puzzled Ji Yukan and said softly, "Has Chen Pinggan ever scolded the little slug of Mud Bottle Alley?" Ji Yukan smiled. He also cried. So that's how it is. Chen Pinggan's reasoning is so simple. 453. Chen Pinggan's trip to the Verdant Gorge Island was hurried, and he left in a hurry. In fact, whether Ji Yukan stayed or left did not affect the overall situation. In fact, Chen Pinggan could not change much. There were some things behind the scenes, whether it was the actions of Dali Su Gaoshan, the changes in the Book Lake, or the plan of the cultivators of Willow Island. As long as Chen Pinggan was unwilling to leave the central part of the Aquarius continent, it did not matter where Ji Yukan was. However, if Ji Yukan was willing to stay on the Verdant Gorge Island and guard the Spring Court Mansion, it was the best. Chen Pinggan rowed the boat and left. Disembarking at the Green Tong City, the ferry passed by the Furong Mountain that had been demolished by the ancestral hall. When the fire dragon appeared, its arrogance soared to the sky, and it was not inferior to the loach's ability to overturn the river and pour the water. Those who were at a high enough level in the Book Lake mistakenly thought that it was Ji Yukan's great Tao enemy. Once it appeared, a battle between water and fire would break out. However, they did not expect that the group of foreigners who were rumored to be Dallas clingy men would choose to withdraw and leave. However, there was no lack of excitement after that. The suspicious green-clothed woman who was shrouded in clouds and mist and a strange young man with a mole between his eyebrows joined forces to kill the 9th-level sword cultivator of the Zhuang dynasty. It was said that not only did the cultivator's physical body become food, even his nascent soul was detained. This meant that the two old cultivators who looked like a young man and a young woman held back a lot of their strength during the pursuit, which made people even more afraid. There was a world of difference between defeating an earthly immortal and killing an earthly immortal. After Chen Pinggan went ashore, he took back the horse from the inn and went to the shabby alley to buy a few meat buns with thin skin and stuffing. After a full meal, he then hurried to the southeast border of the Stone-Hare Kingdom that bordered the Meili Kingdom. The mountain pass was called Stay, and it was a little famous in history. There were many different opinions. Some said that the founding emperor of the Zhuang dynasty had once been here and succeeded in persuading the advisor of the Han tribe who was praised as having half an achievement to stay. Others said that the most powerful Yuanying sword cultivator in the history of the Zhuang dynasty was disheartened and could not comprehend Dao there. In the end, he was still unable to become a sword celestial of the upper 5 states. He used a sharp sword chi to write the word stay on the cliff. This made the sword cultivators in the central part of the Aquarius continent, as well as many Jianghu swordsmen, regard the small mountain pass of the vassal state as a sacred place in their hearts. They would all go there to admire the 2 words stay on the cliff. Before autumn, Chen Pinggan rushed to Liuxia Pass and met up with Seng Yi and Ma Duyi, who had been waiting for a long time. Seeing the familiar figure of Mr. Chen and his horse, Ma Duyi and Seng Yi were obviously relieved. At first, the two of them felt quite comfortable without Chen Pinggan beside them. Seng Yi was carrying the Yama Palace in the bamboo box. In times of danger, he could reluctantly invite a few Immortals Cave realm ghosts who were personally appointed by Chen Pinggan to walk in the Stone-Hare Kingdom's Jianghu. As long as they did not show off, it was enough. Therefore, Seng Yi and Ma Duyi were unrestrained at first. But as they walked, they felt a little jittery. Even if they only saw the Dali scouts wandering in the wilderness, they would still be afraid. At that time, they realized that it was very different without Mr. Chen by their side. With Mr. Chen there were rules, but the man and the ghost were at ease. Seng Yi and Ma Duyi had talked about this feeling in private, but they could not come to a conclusion. They only felt that Mr. Chen's cultivation was not only high. At the historical site of Liuxia Pass, they raised their heads and looked at the huge characters carved on the cliff. They also noticed that Mr. Chen had gone to Bookslip Lake alone. After he returned, he became more and more worried. Chen Pinggan also noticed this. After thinking about it, he looked away and said frankly to them, "Before coming here, I took 2 jade tokens and wanted to see Dali Su Gaoshan. But I didn't get to see him." Seng Yi did not think too much about it. He just felt a little disappointed for Mr. Chen. But Ma Duyi knew that the clouds were treacherous and there must be hidden dangers. Chen Pinggan tried to use a casual tone and said with a smile, "There are many things that you will never know the answer to if you don't touch it. As long as you make a choice, there will be good and bad. This is the result of the bad. Not only did we not get to see Su Gaoshan, we may not have alerted the enemy, but this Dali general will definitely worry about us. So we must be more careful from now on. If any of you accidentally see Dalis cultivators on the way to Meili, just pretend you didn't see them. Don't worry, we won't have to worry about our lives." Although Seng Yi nodded, he could not help but feel worried. Ma Duyi, on the other hand, was as open-minded as the world. He laughed and said, "As long as we don't get chased by Dalis cavalry, I don't care. If you want to look, then look. We won't get away with a single copper coin." Chen Pinggan said helplessly, "You two just need to compliment each other." Ma Duyi glared. "Mr. Chen, don't play matchmaker. I don't like Seng Yi." Seng Yi smiled innocently. He did not dare to say that he did not like Ma Duyi either. At the foot of the cliff, there were only a few people. Most of them were traveling merchants from the Shihao Kingdom and the Meili Kingdom who needed to pass the test. Most of them were young and hoped that they could show off their wealth when they returned home. As for the older merchants and Jianghu veterans, they had already seen the 2 words stay on the cliff countless times. Just as Chen Pinggan and the other 2 turned their horses around, a group of Jianghu swordsmen rushed over. They dismounted and took down their swords. Facing the two words on the cliff, they bowed respectfully. Among them, the elder loudly told the rest of the young disciples about the history of this ancient site. Of course, he also said a few words of praise for the people who used swords. The young men and women listened in high spirits, their emotions surging. Most of them had left their masters and came to Jianghu to gain experience. Chen Pinggan could naturally see the depth of the elder. He was a level 5 martial artist with a good foundation. In a vassal state like Meili Nation, he should be a famous Jianghu veteran. However, unless the old swordsman encountered a great opportunity, he would have no hope of reaching level 6. Because of the exhaustion of his qi and blood, he seemed to have fallen ill. His soul was unstable, making the bottleneck of level 5 even more indestructible. If he met a younger martial artist of the same level, he would naturally be afraid of the strong. When they met in Jianghu, most of them just brushed past each other. The three rode far away. The old man turned his head and looked at the backs of the three riders. One of them was a slender young girl whose eyebrows had slightly grown. She asked, "Master, the one wearing a green robe with a sword and a saber hanging on his waist is obviously someone from Jianghu. Is he a hidden master?" The elder smiled. Just because he's in green with a sword doesn't mean that he's a sword immortal. They all mounted their horses and continued on their way. The Meili kingdom was relatively peaceful, but the neighboring Stonehair kingdom was in chaos. Previously, an honest and upright official from the Stonehair kingdom, who had a good relationship with his sect, sent a secret letter saying that there was a powerful eunuch from the Stonehair kingdom who wanted to kill him and implicate the innocent. The loyal official, who was as famous as the courageous imperial censor in the Shihao nation's imperial court, said in the letter that he was willing to stay in the capital and be buried with the nation. He wanted the Dali barbarians to know that there were still a few scholars in Shihao nation who were not afraid of death. However, he hoped that his Jianghu friends could escort the local family members to Meili nation to seek refuge. Then he could go on with peace of mind. After Liuxia Pass, the place where the horses stepped on was the territory of Shihao nation. There was a sentence in the official's letter that was written in heavy handwriting. When the old Jianghu martial artist and his fellow disciples read it, they all sighed with emotion. That was why he brought his disciples to take the risk and rode the horses in Jianghu without hesitation. The Han family is mellow and honest. Generations of emperors valued literary heroes and raised scholars for 200 years. They never mistreated scholars. We scholars should not let the Han family down. The elder sat on the horse and sighed in his heart. The Dali Iron Cavalry was now pressuring the Meili nation's army. The world was vast. Was it so difficult to find a place for the common people to settle down and a place for the scholars to be at ease? This experienced Jianghu man, who was used to bloody storms and ups and downs, had an unspeakable thought deep in his heart. If only the barbarians of the Great Li dynasty could take down the Zhuang dynasty as soon as possible. After the chaos, there might be an opportunity for the Great Era. No matter what, it would be better than the few cavalry troops of the Great Li dynasty, who were like a few knives that made a hole in the vassal states of the Zhuang dynasty. They had been cutting flesh with blunt knives. Wouldn't it be the common people who suffered? Without mentioning anything else, the barbarians of Great Li were merciless on the battlefield when they attacked the territories of various countries. Their speed of killing was fast. However, if one were to shift their gaze to the north, in the past few years, the smoke of war had gradually dissipated in the north of the Aquarius continent. Countless fleeing commoners had returned to their homeland one after another. The civil officials of Great Li who were stationed in various places had done many personal things. But this kind of nonsense that was destined to be wrong once it was said, the old man could only use mouthful after mouthful of old wine to water it. On the other side, 3 horses galloped. As usual, they helped the otherworldly item ghosts to fulfill their wishes. Then, Zheng Yi and Ma Duyi were in charge of the porridge and medicine shop. But Meili Nation was considered stable and did not do much. The world was in chaos and the world was not good. The common people were ignorant and fearful, but there was nothing they could do. Chen Pinggan and the others came across a strange incident by a stream in the wilderness. A group of bandits were actually looking at a middle-aged Daoist who was lying on a huge rock in the water with a worried frown on his face. The skinny middle-aged Taoist was born in the Zhuang dynasty. He was now in the Immortal's Cave state. He originally thought that the world was in chaos and as a Taoist, he should go down the mountain to help the common people. He did not expect to meet a hemp-clothed sorcerer who was proficient in physiognomy. In the end, the sorcerer was told that he was a pitiful person who was destined to die young and starve for a lifetime. The middle-aged Taoist was very sad and began to wait for death. The group of horse bandits who had just entered the country from Shahao Nation had just made a deal and received a lot of money. They stopped their horses by the stream and saw this strange person who was about to die. They almost killed the middle-aged Taoist with a knife. Unexpectedly, the Taoist was very happy and begged them to be faster. The young horse bandit muttered in his heart and did not dare to use his knife. The Taoist was determined to die. He lectured the bandits who were used to robbing and robbing. He talked about blessings and misfortunes. After all, he was an immortal of the middle 5 states in the eyes of the people at the foot of the mountain. He was also an immortal master of the archives. He was knowledgeable and eloquent. Surprisingly, he did not make the bandits angry. Instead, he scared the bandits. They looked at each other and persuaded the middle-aged Taoist not to commit suicide. Therefore, Chen Pinggan saw this scene. The horse bandits had no intention of killing and robbing at this moment. Moreover, they did not think that the 3 riders were easy to bully, so they deliberately turned a blind eye. Chen Pinggan did not care. He stopped the horse to wash the horse's nose and started a fire to cook. He did whatever he needed to do. The middle-aged Taoist saw that the horse bandits did not kill him. With the body of the Immortal's Cave state, he would not die in a short time. Therefore, he just lay on the rock and waited for death. If the horse bandits coveted the 3 people's wealth, the middle-aged Taoist would certainly stop them. Before he died, he would accumulate a small amount of good karma. In his next life, he would be reincarnated into a good body. At least, he would live longer and continue to cultivate. Chen Pinggan squatted by the river with a bowl of rice. It was almost time for the other side to eat. A hot-tempered young horse bandit caught sight of Chen Pinggan's line of sight. He stared at Chen Pinggan and said, "What are you looking at? Haven't you seen heroes eat?" A horse bandit leader kindly went to the rock and handed a bowl of rice to the middle-aged Taoist. He said that it was not a good idea to wait for death. It was better to eat. If there was thunder one day, they could go to the top of the mountain or under the tree and try to see if there was a possibility of being struck by thunder. Only then would it be a clean end. Hearing this, the middle-aged Taoist thought that it made sense. He wondered if he should go to the market to buy a big iron chain. However, he still did not take the bowl of rice. He said that he was not hungry and began to nag. He persuaded the horse bandit that since they were so kind, why not be a good person instead of a horse bandit? Now that the mountain was in chaos, it was better for them to be armed escorts. The horse bandit leader was a little tempted. He took the bowl of rice and left the giant rock in the river. He went back to discuss with his brothers. Chen Pinggan felt that it was interesting. After finishing the rice in the bowl, Chen Pinggan tiptoed and floated to the giant rock. Wearing a green robe, his sleeves fluttered and he landed beside the middle-aged Taoist. The young horse bandit almost spat out the rice in his mouth. However, he was slapped on the head by the horse bandit leader. "What are you looking at? Haven't you seen heroes in Jianghu?" Chen Pinggan sat cross-legged on the giant rock and smiled. "Why do you want to die?" The middle-aged Taoist was actually a kind person. He closed his eyes and said softly, "If one is destined to die, there is no hope for the Tao. Why not die?" Chen Pinggan smiled. "Do you know that there is a serious scripture that is highly respected by Confucianism, Buddhism and Taoism? Well, it is the ancient book that is called the head of all scriptures. There is a saying that the Tao is 50, the heaven gives 49, and man escapes from 1. The middle-aged Taoist nodded. The number of Dian is 50, but 49 are used. We say that one is born too, and all things are born. Chen Pinggan said, "Once the devil barrier comes, the cultivators will have a hard time. Even if you have millions of soldiers, it is difficult to defeat the enemy in your heart. The middle-aged Taoist sat up and sighed. I know the truth, but I am just an ordinary cave-dwelling realm cultivator. How can I dare to hope that the Tao is in me? I am really scared. After thinking for a long time, I still can't break through the barrier in my heart. I can only hope for the next life. Chen Pinggan glanced at the horse bandit in the mountain and nodded. Indeed, it is easy to break the bandits in the mountain, but difficult to break the bandits in the heart. It is all the same. The middle-aged Daoist forced a smile. I appreciate your kindness. A skinny middle-aged Taoist and a haggard young man. They were strangers who met by chance. Both sides stopped talking and said their goodbyes. There was no more exchange of words. The group of horse bandits felt relieved, especially the young horse bandit. He felt that he had just taken a trip around the gates of hell. Zheng Yi could not understand the middle-aged Taoist's thoughts. When they were far away, he asked softly, Mr. Chen, is there really someone in the world who is willing to wait for death? Chen Pinggan nodded. On the path of cultivation, there are all kinds of strange things. That Taoist, according to Buddhism, only by killing yourself will you have the chance to use the rod. Otherwise, even if you are an eminent monk, once you use the rod, you will not be able to achieve Buddhahood. You will only make your head hurt and cry out in pain. The two of you, have you heard of a Buddhist case? An eminent monk said, the heart is like a mirror. Constantly wiping it clean, don't let dust fall. Another monk said, originally there is nothing, where does dust fall? These two gathers, do you think there is a difference between the two? Zheng Yi shook his head. I don't understand these. Ma Duyi smiled. Of course the latter is better. Chen Pinggan sighed softly, perhaps the latter is higher in Buddhism, but the former is a ferry that everyone in the world can sit on. Only when the person who is ferrying puts down the bamboo wormwood in his hand, stands up and goes ashore, and finally takes the step of getting off the boat, can it be said that he has comprehended the latter. Gradual comprehension is the foundation of epiphany. There is actually a sequence in this. In life, the mirror of the heart is covered with dust. If it is not wiped, it will accumulate and become dull. How can there be a Buddha who is born to reach the other shore? Chen Pinggan smiled and added, both gathers are good and correct. The reason why I am chatting with you is because when I was traveling to Qingwan, I heard scholars talking about Buddhism. They were very disdainful of the former and only praised the latter. In addition, in some books that are similar to the writings of scholars, they like to treat the former with derogatory words. I don't think it is very good. Ma Duyi smiled. I rarely heard Mr. Chen talk about Buddhism. So you have already dabbled in it. Mr. Chen, you are really well read. I am very impressed. Ma Duyi made a face. I can't even continue. Chen Pinggan smiled. This shows that your flattery skills are not good enough. After that, the three of them saw a place of historical interest. It was an ownerless deep pool. It was autumn and the air was bitterly cold. On the stone wall, there was a vermilion cliff carving that could not be found in the county records. The ancient wall is painted with dragon gold. Rain workers ride into the autumn pool. The three of them looked up. There were indeed traces of painting on the wall. They could vaguely see the shape of a dragon. Beside their feet, the pool was green and there were no fish or prawns. Chen Pinggan retracted his gaze and reached his hand into the pool. The cold air made him think of the shop of the Ruan family built by the river in his hometown. He was attracted to the gloomy water in the Dragon Whisker River. This deep pool was actually suitable for refining swords. It was just that he did not know why there were no sword cultivators here. Chen Pinggan quickly withdrew his hand. It turned out that the cold energy in the water wasn't pure at all. It was mixed with a lot of evil and foul energy, making it seem like a mess. Although it wasn't enough to immediately harm one's body, it was still far from the word pure. No wonder this was a great taboo for cultivators when refining swords. There must have been a story here in the early years. It was probably like the Eagle Fortress and upper balcony in Tongya continent. After that, Chen Pinggan traveled to Meili country. He passed through the countryside and the county town. There were children who were not used to seeing horses and hid in the depths of the reed flowers. From time to time, he would also encounter seemingly ordinary traveling cultivators. There were also lively wedding processions on the streets of the county town with gongs and drums. Thousands of miles away, they crossed mountains and rivers. Chen Pinggan and the others accidentally came across the ruins of a deserted tomb. They found an ancient sword that was buried in the tombstone and only had the sword hilt. After thousands of years, the sword was still full of sword aura. At first glance, they knew that it was not an ordinary spiritual weapon. It was just that it had not been nourished for a long time and was on the verge of collapse. Ma Dui wanted to take it with him. After all, it was an ownerless object. After some refinement, it might be sold for a good price. However, Chen Pinggan did not agree. He said that this was a spiritual weapon used by a Taoist to suppress the feng shui of this place. It could suppress the evil and evil air so that it would not spread everywhere and become a disaster. As an otherworldly item, how could Ma Dui not see it? He just did not care. He smiled and said, "Then let's pull out the ancient sword. If the deserted tomb is really haunted by demons, we might as well subdue them and get the spiritual weapon. Won't it be the best of both worlds?" Chen Pinggan shook his head and said, "It's too old to be clear. How do you know that there are no difficulties and twists in this?" Ma Dui complained, "Mr. Chen is good at everything. It's just that you don't do things in a straightforward manner." Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "Even a child with weak strength can break a bowl of porcelain. That's also a straightforward manner. Zheng Yi can do it. That group of horse thieves, Zheng Yi can do it. You can do it too. Of course, it's easier for me." Chen Pinggan sighed and said, "The convergence of people's hearts is a very scary thing. Ancient temples are lonely. If one enters alone and burns incense and worships Buddha, one will feel reverence. However, if it is noisy and crowded with people, one might not necessarily be afraid. To put it in a more extreme way, one might say that cutting gold leaf from Buddha's body will be done if someone takes the lead." Chen Pinggan rode through the mass graves. Suddenly, he looked back and there was no one around. Once, they stopped by a lake in the mountains to rest. Zheng Yi picked up stones to play with the water. Ma Dui chose a secluded place alone. He took off his boots and stretched his hands into the cold water. His face was full of smiles. Just then, a dragonfly circled around and flew up to scratch his head. Ma Dui stopped and wanted the dragonfly to stay for a while. In the distance, a young woodcutter with a bundle of firewood on his shoulder happened to pass by. He stopped and looked at him in a daze. He mistook him for a fairy. The young man admired him but felt ashamed. Ma Dui reached out to chase away the dragonfly. He turned his head and reached out to twist the fox fur at his temples. He wanted to suddenly pull it off to scare the dumbfounded country boy. In the end, Chen Pinggan threw a pebble at her, which broke her finger. Ma Dui turned around in a fit of anger. His legs swayed and splashed countless water. The young man ran away quickly. He did not want to tell his peers in the village that he saw such a beautiful fairy sister by the lake. He just wanted to keep it in his heart. In a bustling county, even Chen Pinggan, who was used to seeing things, felt that it was an eye-opener. There was a drunken scholar who ran wildly. His clothes did not cover his body. His chest was bare and his steps were swaying. He was very heroic. He asked his servant to carry a bucket filled with ink. The scholar used his head as a pen to write on the street. There were also servants at the end of the street. Beside them were buckets filled with well water. They were just waiting for their master to go crazy so that they could clean up the mess and clean up. It was not tiring work. It was just that they were always looked down on. They were angry with the bookish master but did not dare to say anything. When he asked the people, he found out that he was a county magistrate with a scholarly title. Chen Pinggan stopped the horse by the street. He saw the county magistrate sitting on the road exhausted. He turned his head and saw the young man who reeked of alcohol. He was covered in wine and ink stains. The smell was very strange. He slapped the street with his palm and laughed loudly. "I respect the gods with calligraphy. May I ask if the gods have the courage to give me a few pointers? Where are the ancient sages? Come, Drink with me. The young man suddenly wailed, I once saw the princess fighting with the bearers in the capital and accidentally learned the true meaning of calligraphy. I saw the princess picking flowers in the temple and learned the meaning of calligraphy. Your Highness, please take a look at the words I wrote for you. Zheng Yi was stunned. Mr. Chen, what did this guy write? I don't recognize a single word. Chen Pinggan held back his laughter and pointed at the street. He said softly, it's a wild cursive, a poem of resentment. As for the content of the cursive, the sentence he just wrote was the moon shines through the window, the autumn ripples are about to slip away, drinking wine with the gentleman. He probably imagined writing a love poem for himself in the tone of the woman he admires. However, these words are really well written. They can't be any better. I've never seen such good cursive writing. I've seen experts in regular script and running script, but this is the first time I've seen such a level of cursive writing. In the end, Chen Pinggan said, don't think that the county magistrate is talking nonsense. His words really have the meaning of the gods. It's only because the spiritual energy here is thin that the door gods and ghosts can't exist. Otherwise, they would really show themselves and bow down to him. Chen Pinggan suddenly laughed. He led the horse and strode forward towards the bookworm, who was drunk on the street and had tears in his eyes. Let's go and buy as many copybooks as we can from him. This business is definitely profitable. It's much better than you guys picking up scraps. But the premise is that we can live for hundreds of years. Zheng Yi and Ma Duyi looked at each other, thinking that Mr. Chen must have also lost his mind. Chen Pinggan came to the scholar who was lying on his back and asked with a smile, I have wine that doesn't lose to the wine brewed by immortals. Can I buy some words from you? The man's eyes were hazy and he shook his head, beg me? Chen Pinggan smiled and nodded, I beg you. That person suddenly burst into tears. You're not the princess, so why are you begging me? Why do I need you to beg me? Let's go, I won't sell you my words, not a single word. Chen Pinggan turned to look at Ma Duyi. When everyone's eyes followed, he shook his wrist and took out a bottle of immortal wine from B-Tail Ferry. He loosened the reins and opened the mud seal. He squatted down and handed the bottle to the scholar. You can decide whether you want to sell it or not after you drink my wine. If you still don't want to sell it after you drink it, take it as a tribute to your calligraphy on the street. That person sat up and took the wine jug. He tilted his head back and gulped down the wine in one gulp. He threw the empty jug aside and stood up shakily. He grabbed Chen Pinggan's arm and asked, Is there any more wine? Chen Pinggan smiled and said, Yes, but not much is left. The man said happily, Let's go to that broken government office. I'll write for you. You can have as much as you want, as long as there's enough wine. Ma Duyi rolled his eyes. Where's the backbone of a scholar? Zheng Yi was a little happy. It was rare to see Mr. Chen in such a good mood. When they arrived at the government office, the scholar pushed away the messy books on the desk and asked his servant to bring him rice paper. He spread it out and grinded the ink. Chen Pinggan put down a bottle of wine beside the scholar's hand. The walls were full of crazy cursive calligraphy that even the scholar himself could not recognize after he woke up. After drinking the wine, the scholar hiccuped and asked, Tell me, what do you want me to write? Give it to some knowledgeable general or minister. Forget it, I don't want to know. Whatever you want to write, it doesn't count. I'll write whatever I want. The falling paper created clouds and smoke, and the whole hall was full of wind and rain. The scholar really wrote whatever he thought of. He often wrote countless words in one stroke. Zheng Yi always felt that this deal was a loss. In the end, the scholar, who had a good alcohol tolerance but not good alcohol tolerance, wrote more than 10 copybooks of different sizes. He was completely drunk and fell to the ground. Chen Pinggan spent a total of 5 bottles of well immortal wine, Old Dragon City Osmanthus wine, and Book Lake Wuti wine. The reason why he could drink so much was not because the scholar was really good at drinking, but because he drank less than half a bottle and spilled more than half a bottle. In Ma Duyi's eyes, it was a waste of resources. Chen Pinggan put away the copybooks and left the government office. The 3 of them led their horses and left. Ma Duyi could not help but ask, I can see that the calligraphy is good, but is it really that good? These immortal wines are worth a lot of money. If converted to silver, is a copy of cursive calligraphy really worth tens of thousands of silver? Chen Pinggan received the copybooks and was very happy. It was as if he had drunk too much wine. He said with certainty, "You don't believe me? Then just wait. When you come here again in the future, this street will definitely be famous everywhere." Thousands of years later, even if that scholar passes away, the entire county will bask in his glory and be remembered by future generations. The three of them slowly left the small county. At this time, the people of the county only saw the bookish county captain as a joke. They did not know that the calligraphy masters and countless literati of the future would envy them for being able to see that person's style. This year's Mid-Autumn Festival, Maley Country's families were still reunited. But it was hard to say for Stone Hair Country. Next year's Mid-Autumn Festival, Maley Country might end up like Stone Hair Country today. There were many monsters in the mountains. Another year's autumn passed and winter came. Just as Chen Pinggan was about to finish his tour of the Maley Kingdom and return to Bookslip Lake, one day, in a remote mountain range, he saw an old ape in rags hanging from a high cliff. Its entire body was wrapped in chains, and when it sensed Chen Pinggan's gaze, the old ape grimaced. Although it didn't roar, its ruthless aura was shocking to the core. Near the old ape, there was a man-made cave. When Chen Pinggan looked over, someone stood up and looked at Chen Pinggan. It was a young monk with a withered face. The monk put his palms together and bowed silently to Chen Pinggan. Chen Pinggan also followed the monk's example and bowed his head and put his palms together. Ma Duyi asked curiously, "What's wrong?" Chen Pinggan shook his head and did not speak. When they walked out of the mountain, Chen Pinggan said, "An eminent monk used his great perseverance to subdue a rebellious inner ape that was manifested by his inner demon." Ma Duyi was amazed. He can manifest his inner demon. Isn't this monk an earth immortal? Chen Pinggan nodded. He's an otherworldly expert. On the other side of the grotto, the young monk sat cross-legged on the cushion. He stood up again and strode out of the grotto. Riding the wind, he leaped into the air and stared at the old ape that had gradually calmed down. The old ape's eyes were filled with complicated emotions. There was anger, hatred, pleading, pity, mockery, and so on. The monk turned his head and looked puzzled. Why was his inner ape so strange today? Previously, when it encountered earthly immortal cultivators who rode on swords or the wind, it never took a second look at them. The young monk seemed to understand something and smiled. He lowered his head and put his palms together again. He chanted a Buddhist chant and returned to the cave to continue sitting. An old cultivator with an indifferent expression and dark eyes appeared in the mass grave where the ancient sword was nailed into the tombstone. Underground, Yin Qi was seething. Even though they sensed that he was most likely an earth immortal of the Yang realm, the malicious ghosts and otherworldly items hiding in the roots of the mountain could not change their natures. They gathered their baleful aura and tried to rush out of the ground. However, every time a malicious ghost surfaced, sword chi would immediately fall like rain. Wails could be heard from underground. Of course, the old cultivator was not afraid of these otherworldly items. He only frowned and muttered to himself, "This is strange. You're not afraid of the aura of a golden core that I purposely let out, but you're afraid of a young man who doesn't look like one?" It was rare to find a place to stay in an immortal inn. Ma Duyi leaned back on the soft bedding with an intoxicated expression. He could endure hardships, but he also had to enjoy blessings. Seng Yi did not feel anything. He cultivated alone in the room. Chen Pinggan asked for an immortal bulletin from the immortal inn. The Maley Kingdom's imperial court also began to quarrel. However, the quarrel was not about whether they should stop the Dali barbarians, but about how to defend their territory. One had to know that this was the decision made by the Maley Kingdom's emperor and ministers when the capital of the Stonehair Kingdom was already in a dangerous situation. The chaotic imperial court of the Stonehair Kingdom finally welcomed a new emperor. It was the vassal king Han Jingling, who had the reputation of virtuous king. He was Huang his father, a general at the border who did not lose a single soldier on the battlefield. He became the leader of the generals of the Stonehair Kingdom in one fell swoop. Huang he was a friend of the new emperor, Han Jingling. He was also appointed as the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. The father and son were in the imperial court together. A large number of Huang family members rose to the sky and controlled the imperial court together. From the capital of the Stonehair Kingdom to other places, there was an endless stream of civil officials and generals who were willing to die. Even if it was just a small matter like pasting the door gods of other countries on their doorsteps, they were still unwilling to do it. Some of the descendants of the family who were unwilling to be killed by their masters secretly pasted the door gods of the Dali, Yuan, and Cao clans. Some ruthless ones simply tied up the masters of the family so that they would not run over to tear the door gods and scold them for being unfilial descendants who had let down their ancestors. There were all kinds of people, and only they knew the joys and sorrows. In this wonderfully written immortal court bulletin, the trivial matters that were written as entertainment material after a meal, when they truly landed on the heads of those influential families, were matters of life and death, and tragedies of broken families and forced families to migrate. Compared to the inconspicuous Stonehair Kingdom, Book Lake was even more earth-shattering and soul-stirring. At the beginning of autumn this year, Su Gaoshan began to settle accounts after autumn. The mountains of Book Lake, led by Grain Island, Huangya Island, Qingzhong Tianlaro, and other islands, surrendered to the Song clan one after another. They were willing to hand over half of their properties and the significant ancestral hall pedigree. Su Gaoshan set up a banquet in Pondwater City's Fan Clan Manor. However, it was only in his name. He sent a general under his command who was only a lower third rank, as well as a few cultivators from the various armies, to be in charge of entertaining the heroes. Su Gaoshan was not even willing to give face to those local bullies of Book Lake who obediently submitted to him. Chen Pinggan was not surprised at all about this. Previously, he submitted a name card to the cavalry of Dali with the offering card and the peace card of the Verdant Gorge Island, saying that he wanted to see the general. In the end, Su Gaoshan's reply was very straightforward. It sounded like the general's own words, which were only 2 words, "Get lost." Chen Pinggan was not angry or aggrieved. He was just a little helpless. As for the Verdant Gorge Island, which had lost Liu Zhimao, they were not willing to fall behind. The forces led by Lord Tian Hu of the White Scale Island and Yu Hui of the Jindan stage, as well as several Jindan stage cultivators who were powerful enough in Book Lake, also sat in the mansion of the Fan family in Pondwater City during the banquet. However, their seats were not at the front. They were not even as good as the Tianlaro Island. These were the wild cultivators of the Book Lake. They dared to risk their lives and could admit defeat. When the situation was good, they could be the ancestor. When the situation was bad, they could be the grandson. Chen Pinggan guessed that there were also some island cultivators who were unwilling to hand over half of their properties. However, there was no need for the cavalry of Dali and the accompanying cultivators to do anything. The forces including Tan Yueni of the Grain Island and the pair of Jindan stage cultivators of the Huangyong Island would help Su Gaoshan settle all the small troubles. There was no need for General Su to work hard. They would be happy to give the heads and properties of the islands to Su Gaoshan as congratulatory gifts. However, the key reason why Su Gaoshan could cut tofu with a knife at Book Lake was that in addition to the outstanding military achievements of his cavalry and the wild cultivators of Book Lake who were good at taking advantage of the situation. In fact, another Dali general, Cao Gui's irresistible force was also very important. Of course, the most important of all was the rumor that the vassal of Dali, Song Jianqiang, would personally accompany a prince of Dali to patrol the border where the cavalry under Cao Gui's command confronted the Zhuang dynasty. Chen Pinggan put down the court bulletin. He folded his hands in his sleeves and fell into deep thought. There was still no definite news about Liu Zhimao's life or death. Generally speaking, Su Gaoshan would still try to rope in a great cultivator like Liu Zhimao who knew how to judge the situation. Moreover, Liu Zhimao was the first to join Dali's side. The problem was that the identity of the foreign cultivators on Gong Willow Island who Liu Larocheng said were unlikable was still not clear. It seemed that this group of people decided Liu Zhimao's life or death. Even Liu Larocheng could only pinch his nose and accept it, so that Su Gaoshan could not add flowers to his book of merits and win another nascent soul stage cultivator for Dali at his fingertips. What a great background! Chen Pinggan rubbed the space between his eyebrows. Could it be the Tongyi sect that had suffered a great loss? He gritted his teeth and made up his mind. Move to Book Lake? But the price to pay was too great. Cultivators could move to other continents, but they could not take away the mountains and rivers that had been cultivated for thousands of years in the territory of the Tongyi sect. When it came to the great migration of two continents, other than the spiritual energy of the blessed enclave, nothing else could be said. Moreover, with such a big movement, the people of the Tongyi sect were already scattered. During the migration process, tigers and wolves would definitely bite the fat meat. When it came to the Great Tao, even if it was a sect that did not lack righteousness, as long as they decided to take action, they would not be lenient. Moreover, the cultivators of the Tongyi sect were arrogant. They were used to being the leaders of the continent's immortals. Would they really be willing to run to the small Aquarius continent to take root and live under the charity of a secular dynasty's Song clan? If it was the Fuswan sect, it would seem more reasonable. However, that group of cultivators acted against Liu Zhimao, especially the little scheme against him, which was also unreasonable. Chen Pinggan stood up and came to the window. This immortal inn was built on the banks of a large river. The view outside the window was wide. The river water was surging and the boats came and went. In his field of vision, it was as small as a grain of rice. The Mayu country's water network was intertwined and the rivers were widespread. This was probably one of the reasons why they dared to fight to the death in the imperial court. On the river surface, there were continuous stretches of warships slowly going against the current. However, the water surface was vast. Even if there were tens of thousands of people with banners, they were still light as a feather. Chen Pinggan lay on the windowsill. Seng Yi and Ma Duyi came together, saying that they wanted to take a look at the water deity temple of the Spring Flower River. It was said that their wishes were especially effective. The water deity also liked to tease mortal teachers. Chen Pinggan was not in the mood. He let them tour the temple by themselves. However, he reminded Ma Duyi that after entering the temple's boundary, he still had to first apologize and take the initiative to express his intention to the water deity temple. Otherwise, according to the rules, he would offend the mountain deity temple. If there was a conflict, they would not be in the right. At that time, he could only apologize and pay for it. In any case, Ma Duyi and Seng Yi would pay for the deity's money. It could not be counted as Chen Pinggan's. Ma Duyi smiled and said that he knew. After walking so far in the Jianghu, he did not need Mr. Chen to nag about such rules. Chen Pinggan did not know whether to laugh or cry. So far in the Jianghu? You and Seng Yi have only walked through the territory of two vassal states. However, Chen Pinggan did not say this. He waved his hand, indicating that they should just go out and play. Otherwise, he would definitely give Ma Duyi a few more words. However, when Seng Yi closed the door, Chen Pinggan took off the blade-strengthening gourd and tossed it to Seng Yi, saying that it was just in case. Seng Yi was naturally overjoyed. However, as soon as the door closed, Ma Duyi snatched it away and hung it on her waist. Seng Yi was at her wits' end. Chen Pinggan smiled knowingly at this. Men giving way to women, and the strong giving way to the weak. At the same time, it was not a condescending attitude of charity. Was this not a matter of heaven and earth? Only such a way of the world would slowly become correct and better. All principles and knowledge had to fall back to order. If one walked a little more, they would have walked so far. If one thought more, they would have thought so much. Chen Pinggan, who was a little tired and a little relaxed, just lay on the windowsill, closing his eyes and taking a nap. Where my heart is at ease is my home. Where my home is, I cannot sleep. Dozens of miles away, in the Spring Flower River God Temple, an old man was lying on the beam of the main hall of the temple eating a chicken leg. His hair was decorated with apricot flowers, and he wore embroidered clothes. He looked very funny. Suddenly, he shivered and almost threw the greasy chicken leg at the head of the pilgrims in the temple. This old man was born as a monster of the water tribe. He was chosen by a gentleman from the Lakeview Academy to build a golden body and become a river god who enjoyed the incense of the mortal world. He soared into the sky and passed through the roof of the main hall. The old water god looked around and was very nervous. He bowed in all directions and said in a trembling voice, "Which saint has graced us with his presence? I am so scared, so scared." As for the culprit, he was taking a nap in the midst of his busy work. With morals, all evil would be repelled, and gods would make way. 454. Outside the window, the river flowed slowly. Chen Pinggan, who was lying on the windowsill, only closed his eyes for a while and his spirit relaxed a little. This was a rare thing. Chen Pinggan had not slept soundly for too long. Seng Yi and Ma Duyi had not returned yet. Chen Pinggan was still a little worried. As he expected, after meeting with Zhong Yi, they returned to the Book Lake and left the verdant canyon island. This time, from the Liuxia Pass to the Meili country, there were indeed many shadows along the way. Someone was following them from afar. The person's cultivation was very high and he hid very well. Chen Pinggan only felt a little in his heart occasionally. Seng Yi and Ma Duyi were kept in the dark from the beginning to the end. Chen Pinggan did not point it out, so that they would be on tenterhooks and easily expose themselves and cause unnecessary trouble. Even if the other party did not show any kindness or hostility, Chen Pinggan still felt uneasy. Before the Book Lake, there were only a few cultivators who could do this. Liu Larocheng, who was in the pure jade realm, disdained to do so, and Liu Zhimao, who was in the nascent soul realm, would not do so. The Song clan did not want to complicate matters. Moreover, Chen Pinggan was from Dali after all, and Liu Baixiang and the others had all become members of Dali. Even if the higher-ups of Dali other than Kuidong were ready to make trouble, such as the confidant spy of the Empress in the palace, they would definitely not have the courage to do anything to the Book Lake. This was because this was under the nose of Kuidong, and Kuidong was most concerned about the rules. Of course, the rules of Dali, from the palace to the military, and to the mountain, were almost all set by Kuidong. Chen Pinggan was almost certain that that person was one of the foreign cultivators on Gong Willow Island, the head of the group. That was not very likely. The matter of Calligraphy Lake was of great importance. Otherwise, he would not have acted to suppress Liu Zhimao. This required him to personally oversee the Gongliu Island. Therefore, it should be the second or third leaders of the group who crossed the river to spy on him and wait for an opportunity to make a move. Fortunately, the other party didn't want to kill him directly. It seemed like he hadn't thought of a foolproof plan that didn't leave any hidden dangers behind. However, once he made his move, it would definitely be thunderous. Regarding this, Chen Pinggan still felt some gratitude towards Liu Larocheng in his heart. Not only did Liu Larocheng not come up with a plan for him, he did not even watch from the sidelines. Instead, Liu Larocheng had secretly warned him and revealed the heavenly secret. Of course, there was another possibility. Liu Larocheng had already told them about the jade tablet in the Confucian temple. The foreign cultivators were also worried that the jade tablet would be destroyed together with the common stone, which would fundamentally ruin their overall plan at the Bookslip Lake. However, Chen Pinggan vaguely felt that Liu Larocheng was an interesting person. The former was more likely. It was a pity that Liu Larocheng was not the person who would ultimately decide the direction of the Bookslip Lake. As a result, the chessboard that he had painstakingly built, together with Liu Zhimao, Tan Yuanyi, and Liu Larocheng, were all destroyed. Chen Pinggan had to admit that this chessboard was almost overturned. Now, Dali's chief general, Su Gaoshan, and the foreign cultivators were playing chess at the Bookslip Lake. Everyone else, including Chen Pinggan, had to stand aside. However, Chen Pinggan did not think that their painstaking efforts were all in vain in the end. Whether to accept one's fate or not, one had to know one's fate. For example, when Chen Pinggan wanted to see Su Gaoshan, he received a rather domineering reply of "get lost." However, Chen Pinggan could accept it calmly. Because of his trip to the Shihao country, he had seen and heard with his own eyes and ears. In addition to the previous summary of the Katkin Islands court bulletin, Chen Pinggan dared to say that he understood Su Gaoshan's temperament relatively well. He was born in the Cold Clan, experienced hardships, and used his glorious military exploits as his foundation. This kind of person held a high position, so he was extremely tenacious. His heart was like a rock, and his state of mind was already similar to the heart of a grand cultivator. Perhaps, when Kui Dong and Song Jianqiang gave him orders, even if they did not lack reprimand, they would still respect Su Gaoshan. However, accepting one's fate was after all a hard work, but there was no reward. Of course, there would still be disappointment. This point was actually no different from Zhong Yi, who appeared in the Yuluo mountain. Chen Pinggan wanted to touch the blade-strengthening gourd and drink a mouthful of wine, but then he remembered that he had already given it to Ma Duyi to hang on his waist. He sat back at the table, thought for a while, and simply took out the calligraphy of the bookish county magistrate. He spread out the calligraphy one by one and admired it. No matter how he looked at it, he liked it. He read it in one breath, to his heart's content, without restraint. What was the difference between this and a martial artist's fist? His expression was moving, he moved back and forth, all was in harmony with the Tao. What was the difference between this and a sword immortal's sword? There were always some similarities in the principles of the world. On each calligraphy, there was a different private seal of the young county magistrate. Most of the time, there was only one seal, and very rarely, there were two seals. One of the calligraphy had a very strong tone: if you hold my waterside portrait, don't be afraid that every word will turn into a flood dragon. If you hold my waterside portrait and travel at night, ghosts and gods will not be able to hide. Next to each other, there were two seals, young flood dragon vigor and thin dragon divine fat. There was another calligraphy, and there were three seals in succession. At that time, the young county magistrate's actions left a deep impression on Chen Pinggan. His face was in high spirits, like a scholar exiled from the school of calligraphy. He laughed and said, "I met a fool who used immortal wine to brew my immortal calligraphy. How delightful!" The seals were respectively Kaiyuan, Changshu, and Immortal Ink Pool. Chen Pinggan put them away one by one. In the future, he must store them in Luo Po Mountain. In the future, no matter who asked, no matter how high the price, he must not sell them. He must pass them down as family heirlooms. When he thought of this, Chen Pinggan could not help but smile. Chen Pinggan stretched his body, both hands in his sleeves, and kept turning his head to look at the river. There was once a beautiful poem extracted from a book and engraved on a bamboo slip. A small bamboo slip, but it carried such a great artistic conception. Falling trees and thousands of mountains, the sky is far and wide, Cheng River is a clear moon. The magnificent river scenery outside the window unknowingly broadened his mind. "Mr. Chi, there is a saying that I may have achieved the things that I could not do at inverted hanging mountain after working hard." After Seng Yi and Ma Duyi returned, Seng Yi was in high spirits. He really met the water god of the spring flower river. He had a flower hairpin and embroidered clothes, and was especially kind. When he saw them, he even showed up and personally brought them around the water god temple. However, Ma Duyi rolled her eyes, saying that the old man's gaze was uncomfortable. When he looked at the blade-strengthening gourd at her waist, he also looked at her waist. Chen Pinggan could not say much about this. The Spring Flower River was the largest river in Mayu country, and Mayu country had always respected the water god. As the number one river god, the Spring Flower River water god was definitely not simple. In fact, Chen Pinggan had already seen many water gods. The first was Wei Pai of Chiduan Mountain, who was considered half a water god's wedding dress ghost. Later on, the water god of the embroidered river appeared beside Jiyu Kan's father, the water god of the buried river in Tongyi continent, and on the way to the north of the Great Spring Dynasty, he met a pair of opposing water gods who fought until the mountains and the water shook. Of course, there was also the water god of the White Swan River that he met in Ziyang Prefecture of Huangting Country, who gave Chen Pinggan a headache. He just did not know how the relationship between the blue-clothed child and his Jianghu friend, the water god of the Imperial River, was now. Wei Pai and Zhu Lian sent a flying sword message to Qingxia Island. The letter more or less mentioned this matter, but it did not say much. It only said that the water god of the Imperial River of Huangting Country had obtained a peace and peace tablet and had personally paid a visit to Longquan County. The blue-clothed child held a welcoming banquet for him at Luopa Mountain, and finally invited the water god to a farewell drink in the small town. After that, The blue-clothed child did not mention much about this good brother who valued friendship and righteousness. Chen Pinggan was somewhat worried, but based on the few words in the letter, it was not good for him to casually warn the blue-clothed child. In the eyes of outsiders, the blue-clothed child's almost childish Jianghu loyalty was actually not something that Chen Pinggan disliked. In his eyes, it was precisely the most valuable aspect of the blue-clothed child. It was much better to be a little foolish than to be shrewd and not at all clever. At least in Chen Pinggan's Luopa Mountain, this point was very important, of the utmost importance. Because this was Chen Pinggan's little world, the rules were set by him. Chen Pinggan's own personal likes and dislikes were like the old Daoist in a Daoist temple. In a blessed land of lotus flowers, he was the god. Outside of this area, there were many people who were shrewd in conducting themselves and different from the great Tao that everyone strived to be first. Chen Pinggan also recognized them, and did not even dislike them. On the contrary, he felt that there were many things that could be learned from them. For example, Sun Jiashu, who owned an entire 100-li-long street outside Old Dragon City. This young head of the Sun family was not only shrewd, but also possessed a unique wisdom in conducting himself. But in the end, Chen Pinggan and Sun Jiashu could only part ways at the Sun family's ancestral home. But in the end, when they boarded the ferry and left Old Dragon City, Chen Pinggan's impression of Sun Jiashu had already deepened. The same rice could not only raise 100 different kinds of people. If one was willing to see the good in others, one would not go to a dead end. One also needed to know more about the differences between others and oneself. Only then would one know why others were living well and why they were not living well. Thinking and measuring, hundreds and thousands of twists and turns. Just like the young county magistrate's cursive handwriting, which was so messy and crazy that Zheng Yi could not recognize a single word at first glance. But in fact, when it came down to the root, wasn't it still a single word? But looking at the characters and admiring the miracle of calligraphy, one could not recognize the characters, and the characters did not recognize one. One could roughly see the momentum, and it did not matter if one did not look at it. But when one was in this complicated world, one could not recognize the various rules and restrictions of this world, especially the rules at the lowest level that were the most easily ignored. Life was about teaching people how to conduct themselves. This had nothing to do with good or evil. The great Tao was selfless. 4 seasons flowed and time passed. After suffering, one could not help but say, "I should have known." Chen Pinggan was a little worried. The little Daoist boy who carried the golden blade strengthening gourd on his back said that he was going to move to another world. Did that mean that the blessed land of lotus flowers would also be brought to the Qingming world? What about the imperial tutor of Nanyuan Kingdom, Zhong Qiu and Cao Qinglang? Would there be a chance to meet them again? The flow of time in the blessed land was under the control of the old Daoist. Would the next time Chen Pinggan returned to the blessed land, Zhong Qiu would already be an ancient person who had obtained a great posthumous title in the history of Nanyuan Kingdom? Then what about Cao Qinglang? Chen Pinggan had always been thinking about Cao Qinglang, the kind-hearted child, and could not forget her. Zheng Yi and Ma Duyi sat at the table chatting and eating melon seeds. Unknowingly, they found that Mr. Chen seemed to be a little worried again. Fortunately, this worry was not the same as before. It was not heavy. It was just the melancholy of thinking about someone or something. It was like a green ant floating on the surface of wine, and did not become sad like aged wine. But this accountant never said anything about his own happiness, anger, sorrow, or joy. He always enjoyed it alone. This made Ma Duyi and Zheng Yi feel a little disappointed. There was a knock on the door. This immortal inn built near the river sent over a copy of the Immortal Court Bulletin compiled by Mayu Kingdom. It was fresh out of the oven and had the unique smell of immortal ink. After Chen Pinggan expressed his thanks, he flipped through it and skimmed through it. He passed it to Ma Duyi and said helplessly, "Su Gaoshan has begun a large-scale attack on Mayu Kingdom. The border near the lower pass has all been lost." There was a detailed record of this matter in the court bulletin. Zhu Mi, one of the 3 navy commanders of Mayu Kingdom, was in charge of guarding the upper reaches of the Spring Flower River. Su Gaoshan, who had already defected to the Great Li's side, intended to lead the army in rebellion and secretly contacted the Great Li. As a result, the Meili Emperor, who had long been aware of this, dispatched several imperial consecrated cultivators to kill him. At that time, 3 cultivators from the Great Li's army who accompanied Zhu Mi died in battle, including a local earth immortal of the Great Li. Su Gaoshan was furious. He ordered the 3 generals under his command to make a military pledge that within a month, they must each attack 3 different places in the Meili Kingdom and form an encirclement around the stubborn capital city of the Meili Kingdom. He also threatened to cut off the Meili Emperor's head and use it as a wine pot. Zheng Yi was just watching the show. He did not understand anyway. He was just impressed by the strength of Dallas Iron Cavalry. The cultivators on the mountain often did not have deep feelings for their country. The longer they cultivated and the longer they left the mortal world, the more indifferent they became. They just stood by and watched coldly. Otherwise, if their cultivation was not enough and they did not truly stand on the mountain peak, they would still be wrapped in the momentum and have no choice but to go down the mountain. That was why the middle-aged Daoist he met at the stream took the initiative to go down the mountain and help the people at the foot of the mountain. This made Chen Pinggan respect him. However, the cultivation of the Great Dao had a demonic barrier in one's heart. The difficulties and perplexities involved could not be said to outsiders. Chen Pinggan did not think that the middle-aged Daoist had to be firm in his heart. Doing good in the mortal world was the right way. Otherwise, he would be at a disadvantage. Ma Duyi saw further than Zheng Yi. He asked doubtfully, "Why is Su Gaoshan in such a hurry to take down my Yu Kingdom? Although I am not familiar with military affairs, I have been through my Yu Kingdom's roads. I know that my Yu Kingdom's waterways are crisscrossed and not suitable for Dallas cavalry." Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "We are talking about Great Li's Iron Cavalry, not just cavalry. It's just that Great Li is famous for its iron cavalry, so it's easy for people to mistake it for Great Li's infantry. On the way down south, what kind of dynasties and vassals have we not experienced? Dali taking down my Yu Kingdom is the general trend. However, you are not wrong. If they are in such a hurry to take down my Yu Kingdom, they will have to pay a higher price than taking down the capital of Shahao Kingdom. Dali and my Yu Kingdom will both lose more soldiers and horses. Only Su Gaoshan himself knows the reason behind this. I believe that there is someone urging Su Gaoshan and Cao Gui. For example, the true backbone of Dallas Iron Cavalry, vassal King Song Jianqiang." Ma Duyi hesitated. Why does Sir not seem to care much about the battlefield? The lives of those warriors on the battlefield are not as important as the lives of the common people. Chen Pinggan thought for a while and drew a circle on the table with his finger. There is a saying in my hometown that the jar will not break away from the well. A general will inevitably die on the battlefield. Joining the army and fighting on the battlefield is like tying your head to your belt. Just like the otherworldly item of the general in Lingguan Temple. Do you think that after he died, he would regret sacrificing his life for the country? Also, the scattered soldiers of Shahao Kingdom who fought with the common people for food in the small county. Even if so many of his fellow soldiers died, how could that young warrior be willing to draw his sword against the common people? Chen Pinggan drew an even bigger circle. You may not know this, but previously in the Stonehair Kingdom, I stopped a young mountain spirit who wanted to kill people in a dog-meat shop in a county city. I even gave him an immortal coin. But if the demon race invades the world on a large scale one day, even if I know that among the demons, there will be the fox spirit from the ancient temple in the early years, and there will be this young spirit who finally gave up on killing people, when I face the mighty army in front of me, and I am the only one standing in front of them, with the city and the common people behind me, what do you think I should do? Go to the battle formation and ask the demons one by one why they want to kill people, and if they are willing to not kill people? Chen Pinggan said indifferently, since I chose to stand there and block the way, it means that I am prepared to die. Since the other party has killed their way there, they should do the same. The military saints guarding the ancient battlefield ruins are guarding the world. For example, the scholarly sage guarding the academy and the Taoist perfected lord guarding the Taoist temple. Why is there such a good time, place, and people? Probably this is part of the reason. When they are in it, outsiders have to do as the Romans do. Chen Pinggan asked. Do you understand what I mean? Zhang Yi shook his head honestly. Ma Duyi asked, I understand the general principle, but there is another problem. What if outsiders can forcefully break the world of the saints? Does it mean that the original principle is wrong? Chen Pinggan shook his head and said, this means that you have not thought clearly about why the saints can guard the world. This is the root, the thread of the network, the beginning of the order. After that, you will wonder why it is still destroyed by external forces, and why the seemingly unreasonable outsiders beat the reasonable ones with their fists. As for why I said seemingly, it is even more complicated. If there is a chance in the future, I will tell you in detail. Otherwise, you will only feel more and more confused, as if there is reason everywhere, but in the end, everyone is unreasonable. Ma Duyi nodded, okay, I will wait and see. Chen Pinggan smiled, but I hope that there will not be such a chance. Ma Duyi was even more confused. Chen Pinggan said slowly, we have seen the misfortune of the Stonehair Kingdom with our own eyes. Only the poets and heroes are lucky. The voices of the fallen kingdom, the words of grief and indignation, and the civil and military officials who died for the kingdom are the easiest to remember in the history books. We have also walked through the Meili Kingdom. Most of the people are diligent and earnest, the scholars and literati, living a stable life. Tell me, which one is luckier, the Stonehair Kingdom or the Meili Kingdom? The answer was obvious. Dying generously was a last resort. Having no regrets did not mean that there were no regrets. Living well, even if it was not a pleasant life, was still the most simple wish of the people. Chen Pinggan smiled, we do not know many simple principles, and it is difficult for us to empathize with the suffering of others. But is this not our fortune? No matter how good a person was, they would not be able to empathize with the suffering of others. Years ago in the Yanji county of the Tsai Kingdom, the young man with a hatchet, Zhao Shuxia, protected the little girl. Why was he willing to trust Chen Pinggan? It was because children were often more sincere, more sensitive to suffering and harder to resist. The little girl nicknamed Luan Luan felt the same joys and sorrows from Chen Pinggan, who was in a more similar situation. It was not because in the eyes of the child, Chen Pinggan was better than the girl beside her who was also a good person. At this moment, Ma Duyi and Zhang Yi looked at each other. In the end, Chen Pinggan's expression was calm as he said, but where did this luck come from? Shouldn't we know and cherish it? When no one is willing to delve into this matter, there is no need to complain when disaster strikes. The heavens will not listen, right? Is that why there is a bodhisattva sitting upside down on the altar? But I still feel that at this juncture, scholars should still take on some responsibility. They have read more books than the common people, obtained scholarly honors, brought glory to their families, and enjoyed greater fortune than the common people. They should take on some more burdens. Chen Pinggan gently placed his hands on the armrests of the chair. When everyone sat in an improper posture, sitting as comfortably as possible, loosening the tenons and rocking the chair, the world would not be peaceful. This was why the Confucians paid particular attention to studying and cultivating the body. They had to sit upright and still, and the gentleman was cautious. After seeing the Bookslip Lake, he was so disappointed. But when Chen Pinggan left the Bookslip Lake, he walked more roads and thought of more things. On the contrary, he was not so disappointed. After a short 2 days of rest, they left the Immortal Inn and headed for the southernmost territory of the Meili Kingdom. On the way down south, Chen Pinggan met a down-and-out scholar. His speech and clothing showed that he had an impressive family background. At that time, the scholar of Meili Kingdom was disheartened about his official career and did not lack money, so he hired a carriage and servants to accompany him on his travels. In the end, one of them was tempted by money and collaborated with the other two to murder him. They almost pushed the scholar, who liked to recite poetry, off the cliff. If it was not for a kind porter who desperately tried to stop them, the scholar would have died before Chen Pinggan could do anything. After that, the family might not even be able to find his bones. After Chen Pinggan stopped them, he asked the scholar how to deal with the carriages and servants. The scholar was also a strange person. Not only did he give them the salary they deserved and let them take the money and leave, he also said that he remembered their household registration. If they dared to do evil again and he found out, he would settle the old and new debts together. A death sentence with their heads cut off was not a problem. The scholar only left behind the porter who carried the load. Then he insisted on traveling with Chen Pinggan. They changed their route and went down south together. The scholar fell in love with Ma Duyi at first sight. Chen Pinggan was not blind. Even Seng Yi could see that. Furthermore, the way the scholar expressed his goodwill was a bit too clumsy. He had nothing to say, so he deliberately talked loudly with Chen Pinggan and criticized the current affairs. Otherwise, he would recite poems and prose in front of the marvelous mountains and rivers. Ma Duyi was very annoyed. For the first time, he wanted Mr. Chen to put away the fox skin talisman and put him in his sleeve. What the eye does not see, the heart does not grieve. If it wasn't for the fact that the scholar didn't lose his elegance and didn't have the nerve to introduce himself and show off his family background, Ma Duyi would have scolded him and told him to put away his bellyful of complaints as soon as possible. The scholar was obviously a descendant of the Meili Kingdom's aristocratic family. Otherwise, the arrogance revealed in his speech was not because he was the top scholar at the age of 20. It was because after 3 years of experience in the capital's Hanlin Academy and the Ministry of Revenue Yamen, he was sent out to be an official. He really wanted to be a good official and have the reputation of being a righteous lord. Unfortunately, after he left office, not to mention the umbrella of the people, there was only a lot of curses. The subordinates of the county Yamen scolded him behind his back for being pedantic and not knowing how to fight for benefits for the Yamen. He only cared about making them suffer. The local tyrants also scolded him for not knowing how to handle affairs. The people also scolded him for fishing for compliments and wasting people's money. One day, when he spoke of his sadness and drank too much wine, the scholar's eyes were filled with tears. He did not care about pretending to be a famous scholar in front of Ma Duyi. Chen Pinggan did not say much. He only talked about his rough views on honest and good officials. He talked about the benefits of the former and the difficulties of the latter. When the scholar heard this, he was drunk and angry. He said that it was already unacceptable for the officials to live with the light and dust. If they still had to wallow in the mire, then what kind of scholar was he? What kind of official was he? A real scholar should rely on real talent and real knowledge to occupy the center of power step by step. Then, he could cleanse the impurities. Only then could he be considered as cultivating the body and governing the country. Otherwise, he should not be an official and let down the sage's principles in the book. Chen Pinggan smiled and said that it was reasonable. He did not persuade him. It was not that Chen Pinggan felt that the reason was unreasonable or that the scholar's thinking was too naive. It was the troublesome thing of this kind of scholar. Chen Pinggan had seen it with his own eyes. Wu Yuan, who had the title of the imperial tutor's disciple, ran into a wall when she first became the county magistrate in Longquan. Speaking of those big surnames, were they not afraid of Kui Dong? However, it was precisely these amiable soft nails that were secretly buried inside and outside of the Yamen, causing Wu Yuan to be badly battered. His official career was not smooth, and in the end, he had no choice but to move out of the small town, moving to a place for the legitimate sons of the Yuan and Cao families. Following Longquan's promotion from a county to a county, Wu Yuan naturally followed suit and was promoted from a county magistrate to a county governor. However, Chen Pinggan dared to assert that Wu Yuan's impression in the Great Li's imperial court had already fallen to the bottom. With a background and a backer, it was naturally not difficult for one to have a smooth sailing life. However, it was destined that one would not be able to have a smooth sailing life. In fact, back then, Wu Yuan had indeed said something from the bottom of her heart to a certain son of a noble family in the capital. She told the secretary clearly that there was a difference between asking everyone to write a plaque for the Wanwu temple or asking the family to break the deadlock in Longquan. Incense was not only between friends, but even within the family, it would also be used up, so it should not be used carelessly. If the present Chen Pinggan heard this, he might sit down with Wu Yuan and have a good drink. Just this sentence alone was enough to make a pot of good wine. In the lotus flower-blessed land, Chen Pinggan had seen many generations of officials and officials. When they became local officials, they thought they could do it. In fact, many people went from glory to darkness and then to complete silence. During this period, there were also shortcuts that broke the rules. After a temporary gain, the local officials also pinched their noses and admitted their losses. However, they often rebounded silently. They increasingly rejected the sons of officials from the capital, and their methods became more sophisticated and insidious, teasing and playing with them like idiots. Therefore, Chen Pinggan was now afraid of Su Gaoshan, who had turned from a peasant to a general in the army, but he would not underestimate Cao Gui, who had a noble family name and was blessed by nature at the beginning of the official career. Ma Duyi was furious. After holding it in for a long time, he could not bear it anymore and wanted to speak. However, Chen Pinggan shook his head and signaled him not to speak. Chen Pinggan could actually understand the scholar's dilemma. It was exactly the same as his own situation in the Bookslip Lake. Should he ask a tiger for its skin and become an ally with Liu Zhimao, who was a mortal enemy and should not rest until one of them was dead? Should they set the rules for the Bookslip Lake together? If he did not do it, it would naturally save him a lot of trouble and effort. If he did it, he would be unhappy in his heart, not to mention other things. Sometimes, in the dead of night, he had to ask himself whether his conscience was lacking. Would there be a day when he would be like Jiyu Kan, who took a wrong step and could not turn back? Unconsciously, he would become the kind of person he liked and disliked the most in the past. Chen Pinggan respected the scholar's choice. Perhaps if he did not become an official, he would have the talent of being the top scholar and the foundation of his family. Wouldn't it be better to concentrate on learning for decades and have students all over the country be a better way to break out of the situation? That was true. That beautiful possibility was right in front of the scholar's path. How could Chen Pinggan bear to say that the scholar was wrong? He should be a scholar with a guilty conscience for the sake of the good fortune of the people at the moment. There was one more good official in the imperial court, but the country had one less real teacher. Chen Pinggan did not dare to jump to conclusions about the trade-offs and gains and losses. These twists and turns were all what Chen Pinggan read and thought about from books. Many words that he once only knew were good but did not know what was good about them, such as Mr. Cheese, alliances, and Old Man Yarrows. The words of all kinds of people on the bamboo slips became clearer and clearer. It was as if the later generations had picked up the beginning and the end of the thread, clear and real. When there was a gathering, there would be a parting. No matter how much the scholar liked Ma Duyi, no matter how much he did not care about Ma Duyi's indifference and alienation, he still had to return to the capital. After all, playing around the mountains and rivers was not the scholar's job. When he left, he told him about his family background, because if Mr. Chen wanted to drink with him in the future and ask for directions, he had to have an address. It turned out that the scholar was the grandson of the Minister of Works of Mayu country. When they met, they would drink together. When they parted, there was no harm in drinking together. This was probably the good Jiang Hu. In fact, Seng Yi still did not quite understand why Mr. Chen was willing to waste his time with a scholar. He insisted on accompanying the scholar to more than 100 miles of mountains and rivers. Even if the scholar was the grandson of a minister, so what? Seng Yi did not think that Mr. Chen needed to deliberately befriend such a person. It was not worth it. Not to mention Mr. Chen, even Seng Yi, a mountain cultivator who had not reached the middle 5 states, had nothing to do with whether he was a mountain cultivator or not. It was because Seng Yi met the same person and encountered the same situation. He saved the person, drank, and left. However, when he thought of Mr. Chen, Seng Yi was relieved. Ma Duyi had said Mr. Chen to his face and was unhappy. Seng Yi actually felt the same, but it was different from Ma Duyi's. Seng Yi felt that Mr. Chen was quite good. Perhaps in the future, when he had Mr. Chen's cultivation and state of mind, he would also chat more with the scholar when he met him again. Seng Yi's. Unknowingly, his heart of cultivation had changed from clinging tightly to Mr. Chen's sleeves and surviving. Even if he left Mr. Chen in the future, he wanted to live a more meaningful life. He wanted to live a different life from the wild cultivators on Maroyu Island and even the entire Bookslip Lake. For example, he wanted to be more patient with the mortal teachers at the foot of the mountain. Seng Yi must not have thought it through, but he had started to think about it. The tall teenager probably did not know that the teenager in Mud Bottle Alley back then also walked like this, and that was how he became the accountant today. After parting with the scholar, the three of them rode to the southernmost city of Mayu country called Jingju. The highest official in the city was not the governor, but the owner of the military officer's office. The military officer was second only to the governor of the military officer's office. Chen Pinggan stayed for more than 10 days. Because he found that the spiritual qi here was far more abundant than that of ordinary towns and cities, and it was beneficial for Ma Duyi and Seng Yi's cultivation, he chose a large inn near the water so that they could cultivate in peace. He himself wandered around the city and heard a lot of things. The military officer had an only son who was mediocre in talent and learning. He had no hope of passing the imperial examinations, and he had no intention of pursuing an official career. He spent most of his time in brothels and had a bad reputation. However, he did not bully men and women. He only had a strange hobby. He liked to let his servants catch cats, dogs, foxes, and the like, break their legs, throw them backward, and watch them as they struggled. In the end, a shocking rumor spread from the military officer's office. The military officer's only son's limbs were broken, and his fate was no different from the cats, dogs, and foxes that had suffered at his hands. His mouth was stuffed with cotton and he was thrown onto the bed. The young man, who had long been hollowed out by alcohol and women, was clearly seriously injured, but he did not die. The military officer was furious. After confirming that it was the work of a demon, he spent a lot of money and invited the immortal masters of 2 immortal abodes to come down the mountain to subdue the demon. Of course, he also wanted to use immortal arts to cure his crippled son. At that time, Chen Pinggan happened to be taking a stroll by the riverside of the transportation. He saw with his own eyes a group of immortal masters entering the city on a small immortal boat. The person standing at the bow of the boat was actually a dragon gate cultivator. In a vassal state like Mayu country, it was very generous to invite a dragon gate cultivator. It seemed that the military officer's residence was indeed very rich. Apart from making it convenient for Seng Yi and Ma Duyi to cultivate, there was actually a more hidden reason why they chose to stay in Jing province. According to the immortal court report of the inn by the Spring Flower River, the green-clothed woman and white-clothed youth who had appeared out of nowhere had once stopped the old Jindan sword cultivator of the Zhuiying dynasty, who was known to be one step away from the nascent soul stage, in the sky above Jing province. Apart from this battle, there were a total of 3 stop-and-go battles before and after Jing province. In the end, they just happened to kill the sword cultivator at the border between Mayu country and the Zhuiying dynasty. Chen Pinggan guessed that Kui Dongshan and Miss Wan Xiu were fishing, luring 1 or 2 nascent soul sword cultivators to leave the mountain and lose the protection of the mountain and river formation. Then, they would rush to Mayu country's territory without caring about anything else and save the Jindan sword cultivator who had a promising future and was a national treasure. Otherwise, with Kui Dongshan's nascent soul cultivation and magical treasures, it would not be troublesome at all to deal with a Jindan sword cultivator. It was very likely that the military school's Wanjie or the school of Moism's Shu Ruo were hiding at the border of Mayu country. Even if both of them were there, Chen Pinggan would not find it strange. As expected of the immortal masters of Dragon Gate cultivators. After meeting up with another group of cultivators of a smaller force, they cured the son of a noble. However, he would walk with a slight limp in the future and was destined to not be able to lift anything heavy. The immortal masters of both sides used their immortal treasures and a spiritual item to follow the clues. That night, they found the demon that dared to attack the military chief's residence. A bloody battle broke out in the city. The immortal masters of each side attacked fiercer than the other, and the demon only avoided them by taking a detour. In fact, to be able to torture the military chief's only son in such a way, sneak in and then leave quietly, it meant that it would be easy for them to kill the young man. However, for some reason, the demon did not kill anyone. It only injured people. In the night, Chen Pinggan had been watching from the top of the city wall with folded arms. If the demon had not been stupid and intentionally or unintentionally chose a route that was not conducive to escape, there would definitely have been heavy casualties in Jingju City tonight. It was not that subduing the demon was wrong, but that the immortal masters of Dragon Gate attacked time and time again without thinking about the consequences. In the end, the demon still managed to escape from the city. The immortal masters swept past the top of the city wall like butterflies and sparrows, leaving behind the officers and soldiers who could only wave their flags and shout, and continued their pursuit outside the city. The officers and soldiers in the city certainly would not have thought that the two groups of immortal masters who left the city to chase after the demon in an aggressive manner actually stopped very quickly. Even though there were no traces of the demon, they still deliberately took out their spiritual items and smashed them continuously at an empty space. It was extremely dazzling. At the same time, the old immortal master of Dragon Gate, who did not attack with all his strength, changed his direction when he left the city and quietly left the demon-hunting army. Chen Pinggan leaped down from the top of the city wall and followed him from a distance. In the mountains over 20 li away from Jingju City, Chen Pinggan stood on the branch of a large tree and watched the old immortal master fight for a while before using a silver-white magic weapon, the demon binding rope, to successfully bind the fox that had revealed its true form. The old immortal master successfully used the demon binding rope to drag the snow-white fox that was covered in blood and went straight to Chen Pinggan. He asked with a smile, "What? You want a share of the loot?" Chen Pinggan floated down to the ground and smiled, "Old immortal master, you've made a good deal. As for my side, I'll go back to the military chief's office and tell them that big demons are hard to tame. Anyway, everyone in the city has seen how you've done your best and dazzling. I'm sure that the border governor won't be able to eat or sleep in peace and will have to obediently hand over a large sum of immortal money. I sincerely hope that old immortal master will be able to catch the demon until the end. Over here, old immortal master has secretly captured the demon. When the time comes, you can find a fox demon that has just transformed into a human and hand it over to the military chief's office." The old immortal master stroked his beard and smiled, "Young man, you have good eyes. Among my slow-witted disciples, there are a few idiots who don't understand. You only took a few glances from the side and you already know the key points." Chen Pinggan joked, "Old immortal master, you're not going to kill me to silence me, are you?" The old cultivator laughed heartily. "I'm not some deranged wild cultivator who would disown his parents and master for money. Speak. Name a price. If the price is fair, then consider it an unexpected windfall for you. After all, a horse won't get fat if it doesn't feed at night." Chen Pinggan asked, "Old immortal master, what are you going to do with this demon?" The old immortal master raised the demon binding rope in his hand. The demon wailed endlessly. After all, it's a demon that cultivated to the sea-viewing realm. After bringing it back to the mountain gate, I'll train it and get rid of its evil tendencies. I'm not boasting, but this is also its good fortune." Chen Pinggan nodded and said with a smile, "There's truth and lies. Let's not care about it. However, I still advise old immortal master to reconsider and not use the demon binding rope to capture me." The old immortal master's eyes were gloomy and unclear. "Young man, you really don't know what's good for you. You're gauging the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain. Aren't you afraid that good things will lead to bad things?" Chen Pinggan covered his sleeves with both hands and restrained his smile. "You actually have to thank this demon. Otherwise, you'd already be half dead after all the sins you've committed in the city." The old immortal master of the Dragon Gate realm laughed as if he had heard a great joke. The leaves shook and rustled down. Chen Pinggan sighed, "You have a way of making money. I think it's very good that you've gotten the ill-gotten wealth of the cow transportation officials. However, in order to make money, you don't care about the lives of the people. Now you're joining hands with others. When they hear the news and rush over, you'll catch the demon and kill it. It's not very kind of you." The old immortal master looked at the young man who looked sickly at first. The more he looked, the more he felt something was wrong. He became more and more fearful. Once cultivators started a feud, it was very easy for one side to die. Otherwise, it would be an endless grudge that lasted for hundreds of years. Chen Pinggan said, "I'll buy it from you. How about it?" The old immortal master was hesitant. Chen Pinggan threw out a jade pendant. It was the first-class consecrator of the verdant Gorge Island. The old immortal master did not dare to reach out and catch it. The secret arts of cultivators were very strange. No one dared to take it lightly. Chen Pinggan did not control the jade pendant back early. He let it hover in the air and let the old immortal master of the Dragon Gate realm scrutinize it carefully. Then he threw out a grain rain coin. Now our verdant gorge island is a little chaotic. Our reputation is not as good as before. You're a famous immortal master of archives in Meili country. Otherwise, you'd be dead by now. This magic weapon, demon binding rope, would also be mine. Take the money and be quiet. Otherwise, you can stay with your disciple for the rest of your life and cultivate in peace on the mountain. Chen Pinggan smiled. Of course, a grain rain coin is definitely not a fair price. But if the price is fair, is it worthy of this jade pendant? Am I right, immortal master? Chen Pinggan patted the blade strengthening gourd. 2 flying swords flew out and disappeared in a flash. The old immortal master's eyelids were trembling. He waved his sleeve and pushed the jade pendant back to the young sword immortal in green cotton-padded clothes. Then he took the grain rain coin and bowed with a smile. No discord, no concord. If you trust me, you can come to our Dragon Pan mountain as a guest in the future. Chen Pinggan put away the jade pendant. Chu Iwu also flew back to the blade strengthening gourd and smiled. Immortal master, you're so good at doing business. I don't dare to give you money. The old immortal master laughed heartily. He shook the demon binding rope and the snow-white fox fell to the ground. He put away the magic weapon and said a few tough words. As long as the verdant gorge island can stand firm in the Book Lake, the little Dragon Pan mountain will only give you money and dare not accept gifts. I dare not. If the verdant gorge island is gone one day, I hope we won't meet again. Otherwise, it will hurt our relationship. The old immortal master did not hesitate. After saying these words, he left immediately. Chen Pinggan flew up to the branch and landed on the ground after a while. He really left. The snow-white fox curled up on the ground. While healing, she stared at the young immortal master with her eyes wide open. Is he really a sword immortal master? After she went down the mountain, she did not dare to show off. She did not see many immortal masters on the mountain. Therefore, this was the first time she saw a sword immortal master. Chen Pinggan waved his hand. Let's go. Don't show your weakness to the enemy. I know that although you can't fight, you can walk without any problems. Remember not to appear in the Jing province for the time being. She blinked her eyes. Chen Pinggan joked. Why? Are you blaming me for wasting your fortune in the Dragon Pan mountain? She opened her mouth and said in a clear voice, Dragon Coil Mountain is rearing a very terrifying evil python. It is the true guardian of the mountain and likes to devour monsters. So that old bastard just now was lying to you. You must be careful in the future. Chen Pinggan nodded, indicating that he would be careful. Then, he did not walk forward. Instead, he squatted down on the ground. Are you wondering why I, a wild immortal master from the Bookslip Lake, would save you? She quickly shut her mouth and did not say a word. Chen Pinggan smiled and threw a small porcelain bottle. It rolled in front of the snow-white fox and said, If you don't trust me, you can keep it first. She finally could not help but ask, What are you after? Chen Pinggan smiled and said, Then let me ask you. In order to not hurt the innocent, you were almost caught in the city. What are you after? She smiled and squinted her eyes. It was very funny for a fox to act like a woman in the human world. She said coquettishly, Young master, we are kindred spirits. However, she soon put on a bitter face and felt sorry. She always felt that she was sorry for this benefactor of hers. Because they were lucky enough to be born as humans. In the words of scolding others, there was a saying that they were worse than beasts. Chen Pinggan did not comment and waved his hand. Go, go. People's hearts are full of evil. It's very scary. In the future, don't rely on your cultivation to play in the human world. You have fought with the heavens and earth and won once. That's why you have today's cultivation. You must cherish it. But when you fight with people, how can you be a match for those wild immortal masters and those wild immortal masters? Go. In the future, if you can't help but come to the human world again, you must be more careful. Also, Don't think that you can meet people like me every time in the future. How do you know if a good person today will become a bad person in the future? She gently raised a paw and covered her mouth. She laughed and said, how can a person who can say that become a bad person? I don't believe it. Chen Pinggan covered his sleeves and squatted there. He smiled and said, if you don't believe it, it's up to you. But I have to remind you, that old scoundrel of Dragon Coil Mountain might go back on his words. After meeting with the other immortal masters, he might come over to kill you. He'll catch you and feed you to that evil python. The snow-white fox hesitated for a moment and quickly put away the porcelain bottle. With a whoosh, it flew out. However, after running for more than 10 steps, it turned its head and stood on its 2 feet. It imitated that person and bowed to bid farewell. That young man had been squatting there, but he didn't forget to wave at her. After that little fellow left, Chen Pinggan stood up and slowly walked toward Jingju City. He would treat it as a night tour of the forest. Thinking that he lost another grain of grain rain money, Chen Pinggan sighed and said that he could not be so prodigal next time. However, this accountant probably forgot that when he gave out a grain of grain rain money at the dog meat shop, he seemed to have reminded him in the same way. Chen Pinggan completely forgot about this. As he strolled, he looked up. The bright moon was in the sky, forgetting everything else. First, he set a small goal. For example, 1 second. Remember, Book Guest House mobile version reading website. "4:55. At the dining table, Li was a little hesitant. This was the second time his wife had asked him to drink as much as he wanted. It had been many years since the last time. Seeing that Chen Pinggan had deliberately suppressed his fist intent and drank 2 or 3 cups of wine, Li felt that something was wrong. Why? Did he fall asleep right after getting drunk? Was he thinking that he could eat less of a meal with his fists? But this did not seem like something Chen Pinggan would do. However, Li was still very happy that someone was drinking with him. He put one leg on the bench, but when he lifted his leg and bent his back to pick up a piece of stir-fried pork with winter bamboo shoots, his wife glared at him and scolded him to act like an elder. Li was very conflicted and could only sit properly. He had never seen her so fussy before. He would occasionally drink a few cups of wine, but his wife did not care about these things. Their family had always been like this. Li Huai liked to squat on the bench and gnaw on chicken legs and hooves when he was young. He did not have any so-called upbringing. Women were not allowed to eat at the table. Li's family did not have such rules. Li glanced at the dish that was deliberately placed beside Chen Pinggan's hand. He realized that his wife was glancing at him. Li understood that this dish of stir-fried pork with winter bamboo shoots had nothing to do with him. The meat dishes on the table were all with Chen Pinggan. Li's table was filled with vegetables. Li took a sip of wine and smiled. Actually, this scene was not unfamiliar to him. During the years when Li Huai did not go out to study and travel, their family had always been like this. Li Huai stayed in the Great Sui Kingdom to study and learn. The 3 of them moved to the foot of Lion Peak in the North Continent. Even though Li Huai often went down the mountain and the family of 3 gathered for dinner, Li always felt that it was a little lacking without Li Huai there. Li did not favor boys over girls. This had nothing to do with what kind of person his daughter was. All these years, Li had only one request for Li Liu. That was to settle matters outside and not bring them into the house. Of course, his son-in-law was an exception. Chen Pinggan was 70 to 80% drunk, but he was not so drunk that his teeth were chattering, and he could walk without hindrance. He left the square table and the main room, and went to Li Huai's room to rest. He took off his boots, lay down gently, and closed his eyes. Suddenly, he sat up and turned the boots by the bed so that the tips of the boots were facing inward. Only then did he continue to lie down and sleep soundly. It turned out that he missed his hometown, Luopo Mountain, and his first disciple. Li was busy cleaning up the bowls and chopsticks. The woman was still sitting in the same place. She suddenly asked, Li, what do you think of Chen Pinggan? Li smiled and said, sure. Otherwise, the man wouldn't have thought of selling the Dragon King basket and the golden carp to Chen Pinggan. Because of this, he was reprimanded at the Yang family's shop. The woman whispered, "Do you think this child likes our daughter?" Li Er stopped what he was doing and said helplessly, "This is not a matter of whether he likes her or not. Chen Pinggan already has someone he likes." The woman was disappointed. "Our daughter is not lucky." Li Er smiled and didn't say anything. The woman slammed the table and said angrily, "What are you laughing at? Is Li Liu your biological daughter? Am I the one who stole a man?" Li Er shrunk his neck and said in a muffled voice, "What nonsense are you talking about?" The woman complained, "Our daughter is stupid, and her father is useless. He doesn't even care. What sin did our daughter commit in her previous life to be reincarnated into this family to suffer? Don't tell me that Li Huai will have to support her parents and daughter-in-law in the future, and in the end, even her married sister will have to take care of her for the rest of her life." Li Er asked curiously, "Don't Dong Shuijing and Lin Shuyi, who studied in the same school as Li Huai, like our daughter since she was young? I didn't see you care so much before. And the scholar who walked with us last time, didn't you also think that he was not bad?" The woman shook her head, "That's not the same. I think Chen Pinggan is the most like Mr. Qi from the school. I can't reason with him, but I'm very good at judging people." Li Er didn't say anything else. He nodded and continued to clean up the dishes. The last time his wife let him drink to his heart's content, it was Mr. Qi who came. The woman asked tentatively, "Does our daughter really have a chance?" Li Er felt a little guilty. The next round of punches would make Chen Pinggan full. Even if he had a chance, he probably wouldn't have a chance. The next day, at dawn, Chen Pinggan got up and helped to carry water back. At the well, the neighbors asked and said that it was a distant relative of the Li family. Then, Li Er took Chen Pinggan out to Lion Peak and told the woman that they were going for a walk on the mountain. The woman was beaming with joy and couldn't close her mouth. She didn't say anything. Li Er was a little confused. He didn't know what was going on. Li Er took Chen Pinggan straight to Lion Peak's ancestral hall. They chatted along the way. Li Er thanked Chen Pinggan about Zheng Dafeng guarding the door at Luopa Mountain. Chen Pinggan said that it was nothing. Li Er said that with Zheng Dafeng's temper, if it was in the past, he would definitely not be willing to return to the Yang family's shop for the rest of his life. He would just eat and wait for death. His life would really be over. In the end, his master didn't treat Zheng Dafeng as a disciple even once. Zheng Dafeng also didn't dare to treat himself as a disciple for the rest of his life. In the current situation, although he was down and out, the master and disciple were already master and disciple. It was very different. Chen Pinggan had always felt that this Uncle Li was the kind of person who understood life the best in the world. Now, it seemed like that was indeed the case. The Lion Peak's mountain master, Huang Cai, was an old immortal master with an immortal aura. Among the nascent soul cultivators in the North Continent, Huang Cai was famous for being good at fighting. Li Er didn't exchange pleasantries and directly asked this famous old nascent soul cultivator to seal the mountain. Huang Cai didn't say anything else and immediately ordered Lion Peak to seal the mountain. He also didn't mention when the mountain would open. For an immortal mountain, sealing the mountain was a big deal. It was either a great enemy or the patriarch was in seclusion to break through the realm. Li Er handed the respectful Lion Peak's mountain master a piece of paper and asked Huang Cai to get the medicine according to what was written on the paper. Huang Cai still didn't ask anything. He just looked at the young outsider with a strange gaze. If Chen Pinggan said that the shop at the foot of the mountain was a little dark under the light, now that he was interacting with an outsider, he immediately understood. However, he didn't explain much. Everything could wait until Li Liu returned to Lion Peak. Li Er brought Chen Pinggan to the gate of an ancient mansion at the peak of Lion Peak. This was the place where the Lion Peak's founding patriarch cultivated in his early years. After he passed away, it was never opened again. After Li Liu returned to Lion Peak, the gate of the mansion was reopened. There was a different world inside and even Huang Cai wasn't qualified to take half a step in. Chen Pinggan stepped in and realized that it was a cast cave waterway. After passing through the mountain restriction at the gate of the mansion, there was a ferry. The water was dark green and there was a small boat docked at the shore. Li Er personally carried it forward. In the cave, there was neither the sun nor the moon, nor the immortals' fluorite or candlelight. It was still as bright as day. After the small boat traveled for more than 10 miles, the view suddenly opened up. In the distance, there was a strange mirror as big as a lake. It was slightly lower than the surface of the lake. The water from all directions poured into it and disappeared. Li Er explained, "This mirror is the entrance to an ancient cave. Someone didn't like that cave, so they created this formation and have been watering it with water. This mirror is quite tough. Ordinary vigorous fists of the 10 realms can't do anything. Even if I once used 80 fists of pure to shatter it for a moment, it would still be restored to its original state. It is said that only the last realm of the 10 realms, divine arrival, can completely break the mirror. I still need to polish my fist for a long time before I have a chance to enter the divine arrival realm. After that, I can be considered to have broken through the broken path of martial arts and embarked on a true path to heaven." Chen Pinggan hesitated for a moment and couldn't help but say, "Such a precious immortal treasure, it would be a pity to completely shatter it." As for the 3 realms of the 10 realms of martial artist, he had heard of them and just remembered them. Li Er smiled and said, "Only when you can use your fists to break the mirror will you have the right to say whether it is a pity or not." Chen Pinggan felt that until this moment, the person standing beside him was no longer Li Er. Instead, it was a martial artist of the 10 realms. Li Er's figure was no longer beside him. Chen Pinggan knew that something was wrong. As expected, without any warning, a sweep came from behind him. Chen Pinggan's figure seemed to collapse, his fist intent retracted. He didn't care about any style and tried to leap forward. Unexpectedly, he was still swiftly kicked in the back of his waist. There was a series of cracking sounds like firecrackers. Chen Pinggan, who could treat the physique of ordinary martial artists of the golden body realm as paper, was kicked like a drawn bowstring. After a bang, logically speaking, Chen Pinggan should have been kicked dozens of feet away. But Li Er's fist was far faster than Chen Pinggan's movement. Standing beside Chen Pinggan, he punched downwards, smashing into the chest of the leaning back Chen Pinggan. This punch caused Chen Pinggan's back to fall to the ground. Li Er stretched out his leg, twisted his ankle, and casually lifted Chen Pinggan, who had smashed onto the back of his foot, onto the mirror. Chen Pinggan, who only felt that a breath of pure zhenqi was about to collapse, fell heavily onto the mirror. He bounced a few times and suddenly slapped the mirror with his palm. He floated up and stood still, but he still couldn't help but vomit blood. Li Er was still standing on the small boat. The man and the boat didn't move at all. This man said slowly, "Be careful, I don't know the strength of my punches. Back then, Song Jianqiang and I were both at the peak of the 9th realm. In that fight in Liju Grotto Heaven, we fought to our heart's content and I almost accidentally killed him." Chen Pinggan took a deep breath. Seeing that Li Er had no intention of immediately attacking, he gently rolled up his sleeves and lightly twisted the mirror with the tip of his foot. It was indeed abnormally solid. It was like being used to the mud roads of Clay Bottle Alley and then walking on the limestone streets of Fulu Street and Peachleaf Alley. It was a feeling. What did this mean? It meant that taking a punch from Li Er was a kind of pain. Then crashing into the mirror would add fuel to the fire. It would be more disastrous than crashing into the walls of Luopa Mountain's bamboo building. Chen Pinggan's figure swayed. He smiled bitterly and asked, "Uncle Li, do you always punch at the 9th realm?" Li Er shook his head and said, "Of course not." Without waiting for Chen Pinggan to feel a little better, Li Er added, "And the 10th realm." Just based on the fact that this kid called him Uncle Li, he couldn't let Chen Pinggan call him that for nothing. Li Er felt that he had to be honest. At the table after the meal, there was a huge commotion to talk about on the North Continent Mountain recently. On the way back to the sect, the Cool Breeze sect's leader, He Xiaoyong, inexplicably had a huge conflict with the infatuated Xu Xian. The man and woman, who were supposed to be a pair of immortal Tao companions, not only did not have any sincerity, it was unknown what Xu Xian said, but He Xiaoyong actually fought fiercely. In a secluded mountain in the Hualing dynasty, after both sides had demarcated the boundary, He Xiaoyong and Xu Xian fought until the mountains and rivers within a radius of 100 miles changed color. The spiritual energy within 1,000 miles of the mountains and rivers was incomparably chaotic. Xu Xian was seriously injured and escaped far away. However, He Xiaoyong directly killed his 2 personal maidservants, and the 2 young female golden core cultivators died. He Xiaoyong also fought for the 2 swords, cough beads, and talismans, and brought them to the Cool Breeze sect. Then, he casually threw the 2 treasures outside the mountain gate. The female sect leader spread the word that if Xu Xian had the ability, he could come and take them. If he didn't have the ability and courage, he could let his master, Bai Chang, come and take the swords. After Xu Xian returned to the mountain, he went into seclusion to heal his injuries. It was rumored that the matter of ascending to the upper 5 realms would have to be delayed for at least 10 years. In this way, at least in terms of realms, once Liu Jinglong broke through and was able to withstand Li Cai and Dong Zhu's sword-seeking 3 times, Xu Xian's cultivation base was not only slower than Liu Jinglong of the Taihui sword sect by 10 years. Xu Xian, who was second only to Lin Su among the 10 young people in the northern continent, would also exchange seats with Liu Jinglong. Therefore, the number 1 sword immortal of the northern lands, Bai Chang, did not sit idly by. However, he did not rely on his identity as a sword immortal to go to the Cool Breeze sect to denounce He Xiaoyong. Bai Chang only said 1 sentence: as long as he, Bai Chang, was in the northern continent, He Xiaoyong could forget about ascending to the ascendant realm. The 2 sects, which were supposed to have a marriage alliance, became mortal enemies. Many fence-sitters, including the Qianglin sect, began to cut off contact with the Cool Breeze sect. Many of their business dealings were even more difficult. Many of the secular forces at the foot of the mountain, including the emperor of the Hualong dynasty's Han family, began to secretly regret. Many of the cultivators who originally planned to send to the Cool Breeze sect to cultivate, even if they were halfway there, returned home. Many of the immortal mountains around the Cool Breeze sect also began to intentionally or unintentionally alienate the Cool Breeze sect, whose foundation was not stable to begin with. They strictly ordered the cultivators of their own mountains not to have too much involvement with the Cool Breeze sect. One of the direct disciples of the Heavenly Lord Xieshe went to the Cool Breeze sect in an aggressive manner. In the end, He Xiaoyong did not see the big picture. The 2 sides, who were originally close to each other, parted on bad terms. After that, the Cool Breeze sect became more and more isolated. There was no help in all directions. Allies were no longer allies. Those who were not allies even became potential hostile forces, causing trouble. No one thought that a new sect that had completely angered the great sword immortal Bai Chang could stay in the northern continent for long. Meanwhile, the Cool Breeze sect was also in turmoil. Half of the consecrators and guests had cut ties with the Cool Breeze sect and sent secret letters. The chairs in the ancestral hall were reduced by as many as 5 in one night. He Xiaoyong was also a strange person. He did not break those chairs. He only moved them out of the ancestral hall and placed them under the eaves outside the door. The Cool Breeze sect, which did not have many disciples to begin with, became even more deserted. Fortunately, the 9 in-name disciples that He Xiaoyong had taken in during his travels in the northern continent were still considered stable. No one chose to betray the Cool Breeze sect. In the eyes of the outside world, it was because those fellows did not understand the meaning of the name Bai Chang. They also did not know that it was extremely dangerous to become enemies on the mountain and shed all pretense of cordiality. These 9 first-generation disciples after the establishment of the Cool Breeze sect were brought back to the mountain by He Xiaoyong one after another. Most of them were ordinary people who had never cultivated before. Their ages were not too different. The oldest person was only in his 30s, and the youngest was only a child of 5 or 6 years old. He Xiaoyong's way of taking in disciples was very strange. Aptitude was also important, but it was not the most important. It was fine as long as they could embark on the path of cultivation. It was more dependent on their own affinity. Today, He Xiaoyong left the small grotto heaven where she cultivated alone. The Cool Breeze sect occupied a place with good feng shui. However, they did not do much construction. They only opened up a small piece of land on the mountainside of the ancestral mountain. The huts were adjacent to each other, and the 9 disciples lived there. Only the place used for teaching and dispelling doubts looked a little like a rich family's mansion. It was similar to the ancestral hall of the rich families at the foot of the mountain. It was used to worship the ancestors, and also to invite teachers to teach the family disciples. When He Xiaoyong took in disciples, she only taught them a Daoist chant that did not have any superiority or inferiority. Other than that, she did not care about it anymore. However, she invited an outsider to teach the disciples daily. This person was neither a consecrator nor a guest, but he had been teaching the 9 disciples here for several years. He did not restrict himself to analyzing the mysteries of the Daoist scriptures. He could teach all the knowledge of the 3 religions and 100 schools. He Xiaoyong seemed to have a lot of trust in this Mr. Li. She was not worried that his teaching here would mislead the disciples and delay their cultivation. She was also not worried that the Cool Breeze sect, which she had said that she would not take in disciples for 100 years, would become a non-existent immortal sect. The 9 of them were still disciples in name for the time being. They were very respectful to this young Mr. Li. He Xiaoyong came to the window of the lecture hall. That Master Li was talking about the poems and articles of the Confucian school. Previously, he talked about the merits of the pond grows spring grass and the moon shines over the tall building. He lamented that these seemingly straightforward poems were the most powerful. They would make future generations of poets regret that they were born thousands of years later. Then, he went on to talk about a wealthy family at the foot of a mountain or a sect on a mountain. He talked about the temperament of the sect's founder and how it would affect the family's style. Finally, he told the 9 of them what they should do if they were to become the sect's founder in the future. When someone saw their master appear, they wanted to stand up and bow. However, He Xiaoyong stretched out her hand and pressed down twice, indicating that in the lecture hall, the teacher was the one with the highest authority. That young-looking Master Li threw out a question and let the 9 students think about it. Then, he left the lecture hall and followed He Xiaoyong. He said, "Sect leader He, you clearly don't have to do this. Forget it. As an outsider, I won't ask too much about the reason. However, I am sure that Bai Shong always keeps his word." Even if He Xiaoyong was the direct disciple of the Taoist sect leader, they were still separated by a whole world. Moreover, if the sword immortals of the northern continent were to get angry, they would not care about these things. Bai Shong obviously did not care now. It was said that in the earliest days of the northern continent, there was once an ancient sword immortal and a student of the sage master. They would point their swords at people and ask with a smile if they would cut them down. The answer was, of course, to cut them down. However, in the end, that sword immortal died in battle at the Great Wall of Sword Qi. The Confucian sage founded the Darling Duck Academy in the northern continent. When he was alive, he took care of the sword immortal's descendants. He Xiaoyong smiled and said, "Mr. Li, I have only been in the Jade Raw realm for a few years. If I were to reach the next immortal realm and then reach the bottleneck, it would take me hundreds of years. If Bai Shong is willing to wait, then let him wait." The scholar, who was respectfully addressed as Mr. Li by He Xiaoyong, said, "The disciple of Lord of Heaven Xieshe was a bit aggressive." He Xiaoyong said, when he was traveling back then, he was taught by Bai Shong. He owes Bai Shong a debt of gratitude. In addition, the Qingliang sect was established and occupied a considerable portion of the Daoist sect's providence in the northern continent. This person would naturally lean towards Xu Xian and Bai Shong. Mr. Li shook his head and said, "If logic can be applied and borrowed like this, I think there is a big problem with Heavenly Lord Xieshe's teachings." He Xiaoyong held back her laughter. Mr. Li was puzzled and asked, "Was I wrong? Always think of your own mistakes first." This was the foundation of this scholar's study. He Xiaoyong shook her head and said, "I hope Mr. Li can repeat this." Mr. Li smiled and said, "If there is a chance, you can try. However, looking at the way Heavenly Lord Xie and the entire sect do things, they might not be likable." He Xiaoyong did not harp on this question. She was afraid that she would laugh out loud. At the same time, she pitied the Heavenly Lord's disciple. She turned her head and looked at a handsome young man under the thatched cottage in the distance. His name was Kui Ci, and he was Mr. Li's attendant who had traveled across continents for many years. Mr. Li said, "I should go down the mountain." He Xiaoyong bowed and said, "I dare not ask you to stay." Li Shisheng bowed as a Confucian disciple. Even if the other party did not return the greeting with a bow, He Xiaoyong still shifted her footsteps and dodged. However, in the end, she was still in the pure jade realm and was also on the Cool Breeze Sect's mountain. Her movements were not noticed by anyone. At least in the eyes of the porcelain person, Kui Ci, the female sect master was still standing in the same place, graciously accepting his teacher's greeting. Dallas Imperial Study. The small court meeting was over. Imperial tutor Kui? Surprisingly, he did not leave. This was something that had never happened before. Emperor Song he did not ask. He just quietly waited for the imperial tutor to continue. Kui stood up from the chair and gently wiped with 2 fingers. A long scroll of mountains and rivers appeared in the imperial study. It was the 3 continents of the Aquarius continent, the northern continent, and the Tongya continent. The young emperor quickly got up and walked to Kui. Beside him. Kui, he slowly said, in the large court meeting, a country's monarch and civil officials talk about the current matters, far from the new year. In the small court meeting, a country's monarch and civil officials talk about the long-term matters of the next 10 years. Right now, I am privately talking to Your Majesty about a 100-year plan. Your Majesty may be able to see part of the process, but you may not be able to see the final result with your own eyes. Song he said softly, just like how father could not see the hooves of the Dali Iron Cavalry stepping on the beach of Old Dragon City. Kui, he said bluntly, more or less. Song he was not disappointed. Instead, he was filled with joy. He smiled, "Teacher, I have actually been waiting for this day." In front of this imperial tutor, as long as there were no other officials around, the young emperor would always follow the etiquette of a student. This matter, there was no need for the Empress Dowager to remind him. Kui, he said, when the situation in the Aquarius continent is settled, it will inevitably be handed over to the Hanlin Academy to compile the biography of the various vassal states' officials. This is definitely not something that Your Majesty can reveal when you are still in office, to prevent the people in the imperial court from being disappointed. This can only be done by the succeeding emperor. This is a family matter of the Aquarius continent and the Dali dynasty. Your Majesty can first think about it, and make a list. Later on, I will see if there is anything that needs to be added. Mending the hearts of the people is as important as mending the old mountains and rivers. After saying that, Kui pointed to the north continent of the Aquarius continent, looking at the vast north continent. "What does Your Majesty think?" Song he replied, "Compared to the past, it is very empty." The sword cultivators of the continent had already left for the inverted suspended mountain. Kui, he nodded his head and said, "Let me advise Your Majesty, the Song clan, never think of meddling in the territories of other continents, it is impossible." Song he was slightly regretful. He initially thought that this Dali imperial tutor, his teacher, would have bigger ambitions than he thought. Kui laughed, "Big ambitions but little talent, isn't that empty?" Song he looked awkward. Kui pointed to the skeleton beach at the southernmost part of the North Continent, to build a long bridge between the cloud-splitting mountain and the skeleton beach. "How does Your Majesty think it should be built?" Song he laughed, "Relying on the money of the deities." Kui nodded his head, but asked again, "Where does the true source of the deities' money come from?" Song his gaze swept across the picture, and looked at the continent further south than the Aquarius continent, the Tongyi continent that is destined to be broken. Kui, he did not nod his head in agreement, nor did he shake his head to deny it. He only asked again, ultimately, "How do you earn money and spend it?" Song he shook his head, the question was too big. Kui said, "After thinking about how to earn money, it is for the sake of spending it. If not, what is the point of staying in the Dali treasury? Every household has mountains of gold and silver, can it be used as food?" This is what the great Li's Song clan did to save themselves after using a continent as their territory. Kui raised his sleeves and pointed to the North Continent and Tongyi Continent at the northern and southern ends of the Aquarius continent at the same time, giving his answer: how to earn money from the North Continent is for the sake of reasonably repairing the broken mountains and rivers of the Tongyi continent. With this in and out, Dali seems to be not earning money, but it has been accumulating its national strength. At the same time, it has gained the approval of the Confucian temple. It is not that Emperor Song he knows how to conduct himself, but it is that Dali's national policy is truly in line with the etiquette and rules of the Confucian temple. It has become the trend of the times. You, Kui, and I will do things that make some people unhappy. Even if the other party has the ability to make you, me, and Dali unhappy, the saints of the Confucian temple will watch coldly from the sidelines. As soon as they reach out, they will be punished. Kui. The embroidered tiger put down his hands and turned to stare at Song He. His expression was slightly cold. Your Majesty, this doesn't mean that Your Majesty is wiser and more powerful than the previous emperor. It is just that Your Majesty is luckier. You became the emperor later and your throne is higher. However, Your Majesty, there is no need to be angry. The merits and demerits belong to the previous emperor. In the future, all the merits and demerits will belong to Your Majesty alone. Your Majesty, there is no need to compete with a dead previous emperor. If you can't recognize this, I think I spoke too early to Your Majesty today. Song He bowed and said, Your Majesty, I will remember your teachings. Kui said, erase some traces of the previous emperor's rule. The previous emperor is dead, and the new emperor is enthroned. What's so difficult about that? Minister Guan and the other old foxes will only laugh at you for being a stingy emperor. In fact, you don't need to say or do anything. After a few more years, the civil and military officials, old and young, will naturally be so smart that no one will be able to see through them. When you become the emperor of the Song clan, your ambition is to rule a continent. The country is surrounded by oceans. This is already an unprecedented feat. You should show some of the emperor's magnanimity that matches it. When the old officials of the previous emperor's dynasty no longer have Kui, you, Song He, will be able to sit in a small court meeting and still be loyal to you and respect you. That is your true ability. If one day, Kui, I will no longer dare to treat you as a student, then I, Song He, will be the true emperor. Kui continued, of course, these two things are difficult. However, Your Majesty, you can try. The emperor's temperament is difficult to predict. That is a trick. You can't have it all, but you can't be the master. Even if the Song clan's throne is cut off one day, every time the history books of the future generations write about Dali, Song He will still be the most colorful stroke. If you want to avoid it, you can't avoid it. If you don't praise him the most, then you are the most vicious. In the end, Kui said with a smile, I will tell Your Majesty some of the schemes of the two continents and the existing chess pieces. Your Majesty will always be Your Majesty. The imperial tutor will only be the imperial tutor. After Pei Qian was carried back to the first floor by Chen Ruchu, he had an unprecedented 3 days of rest. The key point was that he didn't have to lie in bed for 1 day and 1 night without being able to move. Pei Qian happened to hear that Wei Pai was about to hold the Third God's Night Tour banquet. This made Pei Qian, who had finished copying books, very happy. Zhu Lian said that this was called 3 days without a beating. Pei Qian was in a good mood and didn't argue with old chef. Besides, in the letter that his master sent back to Luopo Mountain, at the end, he officially agreed to promote Zhu Mili to the right protector of Luopo Mountain. After letting Pei Qian read the letter 17 or 18 times, he went to the second floor to practice for the first time. He puffed out his chest and stepped on the bamboo stairs step by step. He also shouted loudly for Old Man Kui to quickly open the door and punch him. At that time, Chen Lingjun, who was watching from the first floor, thought that Pei Qian might have been beaten silly or gone mad. At this time, in Zhu Lian's courtyard, Wei Pai was playing chess with Zheng Dafeng. Chen Ruchu gently nibbled on melon seeds. Chen Lingjun had bet that Wei Pai would win, so he placed a handful of snow coins next to the Wei Pai brothers' chess jars. However, Zhu Lian kept nagging over there, saying that Wei Pai was now an immortal in the pure jade realm. His chess skills had skyrocketed, so Chen Lingjun should have a higher chance of winning. In the end, Chen Lingjun looked at the situation and placed a snow coin next to Wei Pai's chest jar. Pei Qian and Zhu Mili, who was carrying the mountain walking stick, ran in circles around the stone table. Wei Pai put his elbow on the table and poked his forehead with his finger. Now that he had boarded the pirate ship, it would be difficult to get off. In any case, his reputation as the righteous god of Beiyu was completely ruined. Zheng Dafeng said angrily, "Losers, if you keep making noise like this, I will lose the game and Brother Lingjun will lose money. You have to pay for it." Pei Qian ran without stopping. "Why should I pay for it? Don't you look like a fool?" Pei Qian continued to hum her folk song. Zhu Mili followed behind Pei Qian and asked curiously, "Where is this song from? I've never heard of it before." Pei Qian stopped and crossed her arms. "It's a song from my hometown. Unfortunately, it was written so well that it didn't spread." Zhu Mili felt that Pei Qian's words didn't make sense. She held the mountain walking stick with both hands and frowned, lost in thought. After Zhu Lian received Kui Dongshan's letter, he still had to wait for Lu Baixiang to come to Luopa Mountain. After attending Wei Ba's night party together, he would go with Liu Zhongruan of Pearl Hairpin Island to look for the Water Temple's dragon boat. Unlike Chen Ping'an's instructions in the letter, after Zhu Lian received Kui Dongshan's reply, there was no need to worry about the Great Li's cavalry and spies. He, Kui Dongshan, would deal with them properly. He was supposed to take the fallen Princess Royal to her hometown anyway. However, Zhu Lian still told Liu Zhongruan that this matter was full of danger. It would be better not to act, otherwise it could be a big disaster. In any case, Zhu Lian's words were just to scare people. In the end, after weighing the pros and cons, Liu Zhongruan gritted his teeth and decided not to touch the Water Temple's dragon boat. Zhu Lian then ignored Liu Zhongruan and the others. Things had changed, and Luopa Mountain decided to take more risks. So the two sides could actually give it a try. However, the split between the two sides could no longer be 50-50. Luopa Mountain had to take 20% more. The two sides haggled, and it became 40-60 for Xieyu Back and Luopa Mountain. Zhu Lian actually didn't really want this extra 10%. When he and Lu Baixiang accompanied Liu Zhongruan to search for treasure, he naturally had a reason to say that the mountain chieftain of Luopo Mountain, who was out on a long journey, had replied and warned him that Zhu Lian had to follow the original plan and split the profits 50-50. At that time, it would seem that everything had returned to normal. Of course, Zhu Lian didn't do a lot of work for nothing. When the Cloud Pinning Mountain officially held the night party, Pei Qian and Zhu Mili didn't participate in the night party. Pei Qian was busy copying more books, so that he wouldn't owe too much because of the boxing. Strangely, even Chen Lingjun didn't join in the fun this time. Instead, his brother Yu Jiangshuaishan made a special trip to Luopa Mountain afterwards to ask why Chen Lingjun didn't show up. After that, Zhu Lian and Lu Baixiang went down the mountain to do business. Liu Zhongruan, who accompanied them, was worried. He felt that the future was uncertain, and that fortune and misfortune were interdependent. After all, they were digging for treasure under the eyes of Dallas cavalry. Lu Baixiang's two disciples, Yuan Bao and Yuan Lai, stayed on Luopa Mountain. The two of them chatted with Center Yuanji, who was brought up the mountain by Zhu Lian. 3 days of playing outside the bamboo building. Compared to 3 days later, the boxing practice in the bamboo building was a world of difference. Zhu Mili carried the mountain walking stick and guarded the path from the mansion to the bamboo building. She didn't allow any outsiders to visit the bamboo building. This was the chief steward Zhu Lian's orders. Zhu Mili didn't dare to leave her post without permission. However, as long as Chen Ruchu finished his work, he would run over and eat melon seeds and pastries with Zhu Mili. When it was time to do something, Chen Ruchu would leave. Zhu Mili obediently squatted in the area that Pei Qian had previously drawn for her. At first, Zhu Mili felt wronged. She felt that the circle drawn by Pei Qian was too small, which made her, the right protector of Luopa Mountain, not big enough. Pei Qian asked her if the door gods of the Riding Dragon Alley at the foot of the mountain were as small as a piece of paper. Was it as big as the circle under her feet? Let's see if those door gods will complain about it. Pei Qian finally asked with a straight face, Zhu Mili, Aren't you a bit cocky as the right protector? Ju Meili hurriedly shook her head. Ju Meili squatted in the circle alone, moving along the non-existent line and circling the circle little by little. When the little girl in black with the mountain walking stick took 1 or 2 steps around, someone jumped out of the soil behind her. A little lotus person came out and trotted a few steps. On the 2nd floor of the bamboo building, Kui Cheng stepped on Pei Qian's forehead on the ground and twisted it hard. He lowered his head and asked, "Before practicing boxing today, you little trash dared to ask me when my boxing practice would end." Kui Cheng kicked one side of Pei Qian's temple and turned to look at the girl who was curled up at the foot of the wall. "You go to the end of the Broken Head Road first." Pei Qian slowly stretched her body. She was just trying to vent her anger. Now she staggered to her feet with her face full of blood. She opened her mouth wide and tilted her head. She stretched out 2 fingers and shook a tooth. Then she pulled it hard and pulled it out. She carefully put away the bloody tooth and hid it in her sleeve. Her master once said that every child would grow up. During this period, the teeth that fell out should be thrown on the top of the bed to make a wish for peace. Pei Qian bent down and clenched her fists. She gently clenched and loosened them and stared at Kui Cheng. He saw her tiptoe touch the ground, her body soared into the air, her foot heavily stomped on the wall of the bamboo building behind her. Her body shot forward like an arrow. Midway she abruptly dropped down, twisted her ankle, slid several steps, deviating from a straight line. Using the iron cavalry chisel formation, she opened her fist wide, raised her fist, and sent a punch toward Kui Cheng, the deity beating the drum style. Pei Qian might not know that the deity drum beating style was the style her master used the least to confront Kui Cheng. Because he knew it was the most useless. But Pei Qian was the opposite. This was the fist she used the most to attack the old man. She punched again and again without success. The old man punched Pei Qian's head. He didn't expect that the moment Pei Qian's body flew out, she kicked out fiercely. Obviously, she had the idea from the beginning that if you punch me, I will kick you back. Unfortunately, Kui Cheng grabbed her ankle with one hand and swung her up high. He slammed her heavily on the ground. Pei Qian's body curled up again. In an instant, her breathing became faster and slower. Kui Cheng sneered and said, "You're a little trash who can't even compare to Chen Pinggan. If I were that big trash, I would also despise you for eating a mouthful of rice. It's a waste of Luo Po Mountain's wealth. You want to rub the corner of this old man's clothes. You think this old man is that Center Yuanji who practiced martial arts like he was sleeping? Again. Don't pretend to be dead. If I can rub the corner of your clothes, this old man will take your surname." Pei Qian heavily hit the ground with his elbow. His body floated in the air, and he stood still. Intermittently, he said vaguely, "You don't have to take my surname. Just take my master's surname. We still have to see if my master agrees." Kui Cheng came in front of Pei Qian in one step. He put one hand behind his back and grabbed Pei Qian's face. Then he took another step and slammed Pei Qian into the wall. The latter's hands and feet hung down. Kui Cheng let go of his hand. Pei Qian sat on the ground with his back against the wall. There was a big smear of blood on the wall above his head. Kui Cheng sneered. "Chen Pinggan is a waste who is afraid of death. Only he would raise a waste who is afraid of death like you. You and your master should hide in Mud Bottle Alley for the rest of your life, picking up chicken shit and dog shit every day. Chen Pinggan is really blind to choose you, Pei Qian, as his first disciple. You are destined to hide behind him for the rest of your life. How can a pitiful worm like you deserve to be a disciple and talk about opening the mountain?" Pei Qian's fingers moved slightly. Finally, he raised his head with difficulty and moved his lips slightly. As a result, the old man stepped on his forehead and bent over. "Little waste, what are you talking about? This old man begs you to speak louder. Are you saying that this old man is right? You and Chen Pinggan should stay in Mud Bottle Alley for the rest of your life, picking up chicken shit and dog shit. What, you pick up chicken shit and dog shit with your walking stick and then let Chen Pinggan put it in a dustpan? This is the best. You don't have to practice martial arts for too long. When Chen Pinggan rolls back to Luo Po Mountain, You and your master, big and small waist, can stay in Mud Bottle Alley. Pei Qian, who was sitting on the ground, slowly raised his hand and punched Kui Cheng's foot. The old man retracted his foot. After the punch missed, he changed his foot and heavily stepped on Pei Qian's head. A moment later, Pei Qian changed her hand and raised his arm to punch. Only then did the old man take a few steps back. He clicked his tongue and said, "With this ability, it seems that you can go with that trash Chen Pinggan to Fulu Street or Peachleaf Alley to clean the boots of those rich masters to make money. Once Chen Pinggan cleans someone's boots, you, as a disciple, can smile and bow, greeting him with a welcome back." Pei Qian's hands and back firmly pressed against the wall. Inch by inch, she slowly got up. She tried to open her eyes and opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The old man smiled. He knew what the little girl was scolding him. Pei Qian bowed her head and bent her waist, gently gasping. Her vision was blurred and she could not see anything clearly. The old man turned around and walked to the bamboo door. He turned his head and smiled. "This old man will open the door now. You can write to Chen Pinggan and say that you, as his disciple, can finally share the burden of your master. Have you thought of a good idea to make money for your master?" In any case, Chen Pinggan came from a peasant background. With such a good-for-nothing disciple like you, earning this kind of money, even if it's shabby, what can he do? "I don't think so." In the twinkling of an eye, Kui Cheng stopped and narrowed his eyes. Pei Qian, who had almost fainted, subconsciously opened her eyes. Her body swayed and stepped out. The next time her body swayed more. After a few steps, Pei Qian disappeared. She stepped out horizontally and suddenly stopped. She jumped up high and pounced on Kui Cheng, punching him in the head. Just like in the small town back then, there was a young man in straw sandals who flew across the stream like an eagle. Kui Cheng hesitated for a moment, but still turned his shoulder and dodged Pei Qian's punch. However, the old man did not punch this time. He just turned his head and saw the little girl squatting on the ground near the door. She had already fainted. She was probably blocking the way and not letting Kui Cheng open the door. Kui Cheng came to the little girl's side and sat down cross-legged. He reached out and gently pressed her little head. He nodded and smiled. "Very good. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.